Chapter 50. Over 100 Class 1 monster cores. The monster cores were quickly counted. The elder in charge of the appraisal said, "There is a total of 98 monster cores here. This is your space belt. Please return the Academy space belt now." The elder handed Jian Chen an emerald green space belt. This was the space belt that Jian Chen's father, Chongyang Ba, had gifted him when he had left the Chongyang clan. Jian Chen looked at the Academy space belt in his hands for a bit, and after some hesitation said, "Teacher, for the time being, please take care of my belt here. After this evaluation ends, I will return the Academy space belt." Hearing this, the elder knit his brows and asked in confusion, "What?" Perhaps it was because Jian Chen alone had gained nearly 100 monster cores, but the elder's attitude towards Jian Chen had clearly changed. "Teacher, I still have Class 2 monster cores in my space belt, so I still need to take part in the Class 2 monster cores evaluation later," Jian Chen plainly said. Right now, the evaluation was only being held for Class 1 monster cores. The evaluation for Class 2 monster cores wouldn't begin until after this one finished. Is that so? You still have Class 2 monster cores?" Hearing this, the elder had disbelief written on his face, and he looked at Jian Chen with suspicion. It wasn't only the elder, the other teachers sitting on the platform were currently looking at Jian Chen with identical expressions. Jian Chen nodded, "Yes, teacher." Hearing this, the elder let out a deep breath. His gaze towards Jian Chen grew solemn. Only now did he realize that he had really underestimated the rumors that had been going around about Chongyang Xiang Tian. However, he didn't bother wasting his breath on this matter, and waved his hand. "All right, store away these monster cores. You can continue to attend the second round of evaluations." Afterwards, Jian Chen placed the 100 or so monster cores back into his space belt and left the platform. However now, both the teachers on the platform and the students surrounding him looked at Jian Chen with completely different expressions. Their gazes were complicated, mixed with jealousy, envy, and even some with disdain. After walking off the platform, Jian Chen didn't rejoin the crowd. Instead, he walked up to the people waiting for the Class 2 monster cores evaluation that were currently lined up in wait. All the students awaiting evaluation had already reached Saint level, and aside from Chongyang Hu's group, all of them looked at Jian Chen with expressions of shock and doubts as he walked up to them. They hadn't even met Jian Chen in the third region, and it was obvious that they found it extremely abnormal for a person not yet a saint to be able to show off Class 2 monster cores. They really found it extremely hard to believe that Jian Chen had actually entered the third region and killed Class 2 magical beasts. In addition, he had at least managed to gain 2 Class 2 monster cores. Lined up behind Jian Chen was Tai Ta. After Jian Chen walked off, Tai Ta also arrived in front of the appraising elder. At this point, Tai Ta being the Kargath Academy's headmaster's apprentice was no longer a secret. All the teachers recognized him. When Tai Ta walked up, the appraising elder could not help but smile as he said, "Tai Ta, I wonder what your profits were like this time?" Tai Ta laughed, but did not say anything in reply. Just as Jian Chen had done, he reached his hand into his space belt and directly pulled out a large handful of monster cores, before lightly placing them on the table. Tai Ta's fists were slightly larger than Jian Chen's, so each one held 14 to 15 monster cores every time. Seeing the 14 to 15 monster cores on the table, the appraising elder began to smile, as he inwardly thought to himself, as expected of the person that the headmaster has his eye on. Although he has the heart and body of a tiger and seemed to lack shrewdness, his talent really cannot help but make one sigh in admiration. After taking out 14 to 15 monster cores, Tai Ta's movements didn't stop at all. He once again reached into his space belt to pull out a fistful of monster cores. The students and teachers all stared at the table as gradually, the number of monster cores increased more and more, until there were multiple dozens. Only after Tai Ta had finally taken out a little under 100 monster cores did he finally stop. Seeing all the monster cores he had gained, Tai Ta laughed in a straightforward manner and happily said, "Teacher, these are the monster cores I have gained." At that moment, all the teachers and students in the vicinity were shocked speechless. They all stared at the slightly under 100 monster cores piled on the table with expressions of disbelief. The appraising elder let out a long breath, and then looked at Tai Ta intensely, and slowly said, "Good, good. Tai Ta, you've done very well, and have not lost any face for your master." Saying this, the elder lowered his head and began to count the monster cores. He did not inquire how Tai Ta had gained those monster cores. In his heart, He had already linked together Tai Ta's means of collecting the monster cores with Jian Chen's. The elder quickly finished counting the monster cores and said, "There are a total of 97 monster cores here." Saying this, the elder recorded it into his notebook. After he had finished taking note, the elder took out an exquisite, extremely well-made black space belt adorned with a few gems, and handed it over along with the badge of glory to Tai Ta, and said, "Tai Ta, this is the space belt that you had left in our care, as well as the badge of glory that you have earned. Collect your monster cores, and then return the Academy space belt to the Academy." It was obvious from a single glance that this high-grade space belt had been given to Tai Ta by the headmaster after he had become the headmaster's apprentice. Otherwise, a child born into a commoner family like him would have absolutely no way of purchasing such a high-grade item like this space belt. Although these types of space belts were not uncommon in Tianyun continent, it was not something that ordinary people could own. Tai Ta's gaze was locked onto the black space belt for a while, before he shook his head and said, "Teacher, I would like to keep this space belt under your care. I still have Class 2 monster cores." "What? You also have Class 2 monster cores?" Hearing this, the appraising elder looked at him with an extremely shocked expression, with a hint of disbelief hidden as well. Hearing Tai Ta's words, the other teachers that were sitting on the platform exchanged glances of disbelief with each other. They hadn't imagined that after Jian Chen, there would be another student not yet at Saint level that had managed to gain Class 2 monster cores. That appraising elder hesitated for a bit before replying, "Tai Ta, did you go to the third region?" Although the elder's question was overstepping his responsibilities, he could not ignore the strong feelings of curiosity in his heart. Even though he had already guessed the answer, he would definitely not dare to believe it unless Tai Ta confirmed the situation. Tai Ta nodded, and spoke in a muffled voice. "Yes, I went to the third region." The appraising elder continued to ask, "Did you gain your Class 2 monster cores from killing magical beasts?" Despite the fact he was far overstepping his boundaries, nobody tried to stop him, since it was not only the elder that was extremely curious to know the answer. Even all of the teachers on the platform felt the same way, and they wanted a clear-cut confirmation. A portion of it was gained from Chongyang Xiang Tian and I killing magical beasts. Tai Ta had no intention of hiding anything, but he only said half of the story. Hearing this, the elder asked in shock and disbelief, "What? You're saying that you and Chongyang Xiang Tian killed Class 2 magical beasts?" Tai Ta nodded and replied yes. This answer made all of the teachers on the platform stunned. Many of them couldn't believe what they had just heard. For two students not yet saints to have killed Class 2 magical beasts was unprecedented in the history of Kargath Academy. Afterwards, Tai Ta stowed away his monster cores and walked off the platform. He joined the group of people waiting for Class 2 monster cores evaluations, and stood behind Jian Chen. However, at this point, Tai Ta and Jian Chen had already become the center of everyone's attention, and the people who had failed the task that were currently standing behind them looked at the two with quite a lot of jealousy. There were many of them that had been pathetically running all over the place to escape from the pursuits of Class 1 magical beasts, and they had never imagined that Jian Chen and Tai Ta, who were not at higher levels than them, would manage to not only gain 100 Class 1 monster cores in the second area, but also gain Class 2 monster cores. This made them feel extremely disoriented, and quite a few of the upperclassmen felt embarrassed as well. Soon afterwards, the Class 1 monster cores evaluation ended. The one that had the highest number of monster cores was Jian Chen, with a total of 98 monster cores, while Tai Ta was in second place, with one less monster core. The two of them had many more times monster cores than Mu Tian, who was in third place. Amidst the crowd of people, Mu Tian's eyes flashed in astonishment at Jian Chen and Tai Ta, and he murmured to himself, "Tai Ta, Chongyang Xiang Tian, your reputation is well deserved. You two are indeed experts that can defeat saints. I'd love to have a chance to interact with the both of you." Although he had had his spotlight taken away by Jian Chen and Tai Ta, Mu Tian did not show a single trace of dissatisfaction. He was still just as indifferent as before, as if this was an insignificant matter that had absolutely no impact on him. At that moment, Chongyang, who walked up to Jian Chen with a happy expression, and said in a low voice, "Fourth brother, the two of you are really too abnormal. Within 3 days, each of you managed to gain nearly 100 monster cores." Chongyang, whose tone barely concealed his happiness, and he looked at Jian Chen proudly. Jian Chen smiled wordlessly. Suddenly, his gaze shifted as he sensed something. He looked behind him to see a youth with tattered clothes glaring at him with poisonous hatred. The youth's gaze did not bother to conceal his strong killing intent, and it was so severe that Jian Chen could not help but furrow his brows. However, when Jian Chen inspected the youth's appearance a bit more closely, his heart suddenly skipped a beat. The youth was Luo Jian, who had all of his monster cores plundered by Jian Chen. Luo Jian's monster cores had been entirely stolen from him mercilessly, and he had even been heavily injured. Although it did not greatly affect his movements, since he and his group of companions had completely lost all of their battle spirit, they had been unable to gather the energy to steal others' monster cores or hunt magical beasts afterwards. Thus, Luo Jian's group had ended the task with failure. Jian Chen smiled, his expression showing a hint of disdain. He paid absolutely no mind to Luo Jian. In regards to people like Luo Jian, Jian Chen had met many of them as a wanderer in his previous world. However, very few of them had the ability to really stir up storms. The second round of monster core evaluations soon started. The students that had reached saint levels and finished their task walked up to the platform in succession. However, there were two exceptions among them: Jian Chen and Tai Ta, who had not yet reached saint level, while everyone else had. The teacher evaluating the Class 2 monster cores was still the same elder, and the assessment progressed quickly. Because of all the stealing that had occurred in the third region, the several hundred students' monster cores had ultimately been gathered by the 30 to 40 people present. Thus, all of them had much more than 2 monster cores, and many people had over 10 monster cores in their possessions. There were even quite a few people that had gained 23 monster cores. Chapter 51, Class 4 Monster Core, 1. Quickly, over 10 people passed the inspection. At this time, an unusual young man came up. This young man had tattered clothes, but the arrogance between his brows was present as ever. When he came up to the table, he quickly brought out a huge pile of monster cores to place onto the table. The old man in charge of the inspection obviously knew this young man, and after counting the number of monster cores on the table, he said appraisingly, "There are a total of 93 magic cores. Pretty good. Cheng Ming Xiang, your score is exceptionally good." Hearing Cheng Ming Xiang's name, Tai Ta, who was at the end of the line, looked at Cheng Ming Xiang standing in front of the table, waiting for his evaluation to finish. Tai Ta's eyes were bright with battle spirit. He hadn't been able to forget his last unfinished fight against Cheng Ming Xiang. At that time, he wasn't as strong as he was right now, especially after killing magical beasts in the forest for the past 3 days. Since he had also gained some pointers from Jian Chen, Tai Ta's current fighting abilities were far greater than they had been before. He believed that with his current strength, as well as his newly gained battle experience, he would be able to fully utilize his godly strength in the fight to make up for the difference in saint force between the two of them. There was definitely no way he'd lose to Cheng Ming Xiang. Although Tai Ta appeared to be thick-headed, he clearly understood that this was not the time to spar against Cheng Ming Xiang, so he could only angrily glare at Cheng Ming Xiang's back. Eventually, he managed to suppress his strong desire to fight Cheng Ming Xiang. Hearing the elder's praise, Cheng Ming Xiang smiled, and his eyes showed pride and a hint of arrogance behind them. The appraising elder recorded the value in his notebook, then continued, 93 Class 2 monster cores, huh? If nothing unexpected happens, then you will definitely be part of the top 3 places for Class 2 monster cores. In addition, you are the cultivation genius, so your future is boundless. Keep working hard. Thank you very much for your praise, Teacher Steve. The elder's compliments made Cheng Ming Xiang's arrogant expression even more pronounced. Afterwards, Cheng Ming Xiang returned the Academy space belt and retrieved his own as well as the badge of glory, before stepping off the platform. After Cheng Ming Xiang left, another student with similarly tattered clothes walked up to the table. He directly pulled out a large handful of monster cores. It seemed that he did not have any less monster cores than Cheng Ming Xiang. The appraising elder smiled and nodded, his gaze resting on the youth's face as he slowly said, "Not bad, Huang Dong. It seems that your harvest this time is quite plentiful." Hearing Huang Dong's name, quite a few students below the platform exclaimed in shock. Jian Chen's expression also shifted, his gaze immediately locking onto that youth's figure. Jian Chen was no stranger to Huang Dong's name. His strength was third on Kargath Academy's top 10 experts list. Jian Chen had heard that his power had already reached the peak saint level last year, and he was only one step away from becoming a great saint. In addition, once he successfully broke through, it would signify that he could graduate. Kargath Academy's top 10 experts list referred to the 10 strongest and most formidable students. All of them had already reached peak saint level, and were not far from becoming great saints. Once they broke through, they would leave the top 10 expert circle. In response to the elder's praise, Huang Dong only smiled and did not reply. Soon, the elder had already finished counting the monster cores on the table. Huang Dong had earned a total of 91 monster cores, 2 less than Chengming Xiang. Once Huang Dong had left the platform, more people from the top 10 experts list appeared on the platform. Almost all of them had numerous monster cores, and the first-ranked student on the top 10 experts list, Bogatti, had a total of 103 monster cores. However, among these top 10 experts, only 4 of them had completed the task. The other 6 had all been eliminated. They had encountered people of the same level as they were, but had lost to the opposite party due to a difference in numbers. Thus, their monster cores had been plundered. Very quickly, all the people on the top 10 experts lists had already left the platform. The people remaining were all extremely well known. At this point, the one who had displayed the highest number of monster cores so far was the first ranked on the top 10 experts list, Bogatti, with a total of 103 monster cores. The person in second place was the fifth ranked, one of the top 10 experts list, Jingming Yu. She was also the sole female on the top 10 experts list. She had earned a total of 101 monster cores, 2 less than Bogatti had. The person in third place was Changming Xiang, with a total of 93 monster cores. Although he was not on the list of top 10 experts, his power had already reached the upper saint levels, and he was also a higher-ranked elite at Kargath Academy. His abilities were not much lower than the people in the list of top 10 experts, and at Kargath Academy, he had acclaimed the title of the cultivation genius. His cultivation speed was much higher than most people's, and his abilities in battle couldn't be underestimated either. After the 3 of them had left, all the people had already determined the top 3 winners, because the only people left in line were people who were not well known in Kargath Academy. Their powers were all only primary or mid-saint levels, and there was, naturally, no way they could compare to the other 3. Changyang, whose group of 4 had managed to pillage quite a few monster cores thanks to being with Jian Chen. Although the 4 of them had equally split half the cores, each one of them had still managed to get 30 to 40 of them. Even though this did not count as that plentiful of an amount, based on their strengths, this number was already quite good. After all, they were only primary-level saints. Very soon, all the saints had already finished their evaluations. Although there were people who had quite a few monster cores, none of them had more than the third-place holder. Right now, the only 2 people remaining were Tai Ta and Jian Chen. Currently, both the teachers on the platform and the students below it had their gazes locked onto Jian Chen and Tai Ta. The 2 of them weren't saints yet, but they had reached the level at which they could kill Class 2 magical beasts. This made quite a few people feel intense jealousy and emotions of turmoil. At that moment, everyone was trying to guess how many monster cores were on these 2, who hadn't condensed saint weapons yet. Of course, nobody dared to use the other upperclassmen as a basis for Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's earnings. They all guessed that the 2 of them wouldn't have that many Class 2 monster cores on them. Jian Chen walked up to the appraising elder and removed his space belt. At this moment, the elder was looking at Jian Chen with an expression of praise. The previous prejudices he originally had towards Jian Chen had now completely disappeared. Although he was sure that Jian Chen and Tai Ta would definitely not have more than 10 Class 2 monster cores in their possessions, just the fact that the 2 of them had entered the 3rd region and slayed Class 2 magical beasts without being a saint was already something that the elder had to have a whole new level of respect for. After all, this was the first time non-saints had ever been able to kill Class 2 magical beasts in the history of Kargath Academy. At that moment, the listless teachers sitting on the platform could not help but get excited. One by one, they turned their gaze towards Jian Chen. Jian Chen calmly swept his gaze across the surrounding teachers. When he confirmed that the teachers were staring at him with eyes that were bright with anticipation, his previous indifferent expression could not help a subtle smile. He directly reached into his space belt and removed a handful of Class 2 monster cores and placed them on the table. There seemed to be around 10 of them. After seeing Jian Chen take out the 10 Class 2 monster cores, many of the teachers on the platform had expressions of shock and disbelief. It was very obvious that this number had surpassed most of their expectations. After all, in terms of strength, the difference between Class 2 magical beasts and Class 1 magical beasts was extremely great. Based on their original assumptions, it would have been quite amazing if Jian Chen only had 3 to 4 Class 2 monster cores. However, they hadn't imagined that he would actually have 10 of them. Following this, without waiting for the others' minds to form any more thoughts, Jian Chen once again withdrew a fistful of Class 2 monster cores from his space belt. Currently, The number of Class 2 monster cores on the table had already reached over a dozen in number. This amount was already equal to the number of cores that some of the Saint students had gained the past 3 days. Witnessing this scene, all the teachers on the platform showed incredulous expressions. Even the appraising elder could not help but be shocked speechless at the dozens of monster cores that Jian Chen had pulled out. Although there were only a few dozen Class 2 monster cores, this still made the teacher's emotions surge even more than when Jian Chen had pulled out around 100 Class 1 monster cores in a single breath. After all, these Class 2 monster cores had been pulled out by a person that hadn't reached Saint level yet. At that moment, all the teachers suddenly realized that if those dozens of monster cores had been earned by Jian Chen personally killing Class 2 magical beasts, then his future achievements would be. When the teachers thought of a student that was not yet a Saint killing Class 2 magical beasts, a dozen of them in fact, they could not help but find it incredible. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en, who was sitting in the chairperson's spot, had a satisfied smile and murmured, "Not bad, not bad, not bad at all. The only thing that remains unknown is how many of these monster cores you were able to earn by killing magical beasts with your own strength. It seems this will have to be more closely investigated later." After taking out dozens of Class 2 monster cores, Jian Chen's movements still did not stop. His hand once again reached into his space belt and pulled out another handful of monster cores. Afterwards, Jian Chen's movements continued to repeat, and under all the incredulous teacher's shocked gazes, he continued to pull out various sized Class 2 monster cores, until the whole table was completely covered. Seeing the table full of Class 2 monster cores, all the teachers on the platform were stuck in a daze. Even the students below the platform that could see what was going on at the table had expressions of disbelief, as if they had just witnessed an unfathomable scene. The appraising elder inhaled deeply, and tried to quell his emotions of shock as well as he could to calm himself down. The monster cores on the table were ones that he had never in his lifetime seen before, and he had seen many more higher-level monster cores before. Yet these Class 2 monster cores could not be described through ordinary means. The appraising elder looked intensely at Jian Chen before lowering his head to count the monster cores. Soon, the assessment had finished. However, the elder had a shocked expression of disbelief on his face, as his emotions that had just calmed down now began to surge uncontrollably once more. He sat in front of the table in a daze, unable to open his mouth and report the number of monster cores. A few breaths later, the Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en sitting in the chairperson's position could finally no longer wait any longer, and said, "Steve, hurry up and report the number of monster cores." Vice Headmaster Bai-en's tone trembled slightly with excitement, although his expression was extremely calm. Hearing the Vice Headmaster's words, the appraising elder took a deep breath, before declaring, "Chongyang Xiang Tian, number of Class 2 monster cores gained, 118. Chapter 52, Class 4 Monster Core, 2. After the appraising elder finished his statement, everyone inhaled sharply in shock. The whole arena instantly became so silent that one would have been able to hear a pin drop. This number made even the Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en speechless. His gaze locked onto the huge pile of Class 2 monster cores on the table with an expression of astonishment. This number far surpassed the amount of monster cores that the previous first-place winner, Bogatti, had. A while passed before a student couldn't help but shout out, "No way, that's definitely impossible. How could he, who isn't yet a saint, be able to gain so many monster cores in the 3rd region, and have even way more than the school's top-ranked expert? Bogatti? This is definitely impossible. He definitely brought these monster cores from an outside source." The single input raised a flood of responses. As the student finished speaking, more and more cries of protest rang out. Jian Chen's nearly 100 Class 1 monster cores had already made many people jealous, and had made them feel that it was unfair. Now that he had taken out 118 Class 2 monster cores, which was an amount even greater than his Class 1 monster cores, the students were no longer able to accept it. Under the platform, the currently number 1 expert in Kargath Academy's rankings, Bogatti, was staring at Jian Chen's back in shock as he murmured, "His strength is obviously not yet at Saint level. How could he have gotten so many Class 2 monster cores? Could it be that these monster cores really were taken from an outside source?" Bogatti also couldn't help but think the same way as the others. However, this assumption was immediately rejected by him, since before entering the forest, the school administration had completely confiscated all of the students' space equipment, and the students had all gone through very strict inspections. In addition, the forest only had one entrance, so there was no chance for someone to sneak monster cores in from the outside. Moreover, even if someone really did manage to bring them in, Bogatti believed that nobody would be stupid enough to present 100 plus Class 2 monster cores at once. That would undoubtedly make the entire school shocked, and the administration would definitely hire people to investigate the situation. Nearby, a gorgeous girl in tattered clothes looked absent-mindedly at Jian Chen's figure on the platform and muttered, "How could that be? A freshman like him who isn't yet a saint actually managed to get 100 plus Class 2 monster cores?" The girl's melodious voice was filled with shock and incredulity. On the other side, when he heard the appraising elder announce Jian Chen's monster core amount, Chengming Xiang gaped in shock as he stared disbelievingly at Jian Chen. However, his expression soon became gloomy, and eventually became completely replaced by wrath. This was because the person in third place for the monster cores competition received rewards. Although these rewards were not worth that much to those born in major clans, like him, instead it's seen as a great honor, a verification of strength. Originally, Chengming Xiang had been placed as third, but now with Jian Chen in the picture, he had been forcibly pushed out of the top 3. This made him extremely angry. What was even harder to accept was the fact that Jian Chen still wasn't even a saint. Changyang Xiang Tian, shifting his gaze, Chengming Xiang's face became beyond gloomy as he looked at Jian Chen with a glare full of poisonous malice. In the crowd, Luo Jia's expression was equally gloomy. He glared hatefully at Jian Chen, as if he could eat Jian Chen alive with his gaze alone. Although Jian Chen's current strength was still quite weak, his spirit was extremely powerful. Perhaps he wouldn't be able to notice an ordinary gaze, but once a particularly severe gaze was pointed towards him, his soul could immediately detect it. Thus, Luo Jian's and Chengming Xiang's malice-filled glares were immediately sensed by Jian Chen. He turned around and used the aid of his powerful soul to track the glance's sources, and easily found Luo Jian buried in the crowd. Seeing Luo Jian's dark expression, Jian Chen sneered, but did not pay any mind to it. He had swiped all of Luo Jian's monster cores from him, forcing him to fail the task. In addition, Jian Chen had injured Luo Jian as well, so it was completely normal for Luo Jian to hate Jian Chen so much. However, as Jian Chen's vision shifted towards Chengming Xiang, his brows furrowed as he showed a helpless expression. He didn't have any enmity with Chengming Xiang. The previous incident in front of the library was so minor that it couldn't have been the cause of such fierce hatred. The main reason was the fact that Jian Chen had forcibly pushed Chengming Xiang out of the top 3. After all, being able to place as the top 3 among the entire academy was an achievement that was an extreme glory. This was especially true for those born in noble clans, as this honor could directly increase their status by a large amount. If it were any of the top 10 experts that had pushed Chengming Xiang out of the first 3 places, he definitely wouldn't have felt unhappy at all. However, since the one who had forced Chengming Xiang out of the top 3 wasn't even on the top 10 list, he was also only a freshman who did not even reach the saint level yet, causing Chengming Xiang, Kargath Academy's cultivation genius, to feel humiliated. He couldn't imagine that a freshman that had just entered the school would end up reaching his level, and from this feeling, a hatred towards Jian Chen was born. Although there was also Tai Ta, who was the headmaster's apprentice, and thus had a greater power behind him than Chengming Xiang had. Of course, Chengming Xiang wouldn't dare to casually offend the headmaster. The appraising elder took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He looked at Jian Chen profoundly, and smiled. "Changyang Xiang Tian, you've really made me shocked. I hadn't imagined that someone like you who isn't yet a saint could actually gain so many Class 2 monster cores. You've already far surpassed the previous first place, Bogatti. It seems that this competition's first place has definitely been taken by you." The elder handed Jian Chen his own space belt and the badge of glory. Jian Chen laughed, and reached out to accept the items. Teacher's words are too much. Nobody can say yet who first place will be. After all, Tai Ta is still behind me. The number of monster cores he has is not any less than me. Saying this, Jian Chen restowed all of the monster cores into his space belt. Hearing Jian Chen's words, the elder shot Jian Chen a deep glance, and he smiled wordlessly. After Jian Chen had completely stored away all of the Class 2 monster cores on the table, he directly walked off the platform. Afterwards, Tai Ta walked up to the table, and began to take out his own Class 2 monster cores from his space belt. Tai Ta had entered the third region with Jian Chen, and they had equally distributed the monster cores. Thus, he had pretty much exactly the same amount of monster cores Jian Chen had. After the appraising elder finished counting, it was revealed that Tai Ta had a total of 119 Class 2 monster cores, only one more than Jian Chen. After the appraising elder announced Tai Ta's total amount of monster cores, all of the people at the arena were once again shocked speechless. Below the platform, the fifth-ranked person on Kargath Academy's top 10 experts, Jing Mingyu, was in a daze. From the look in her eyes, it seemed as if she had lost her spirit. She had suddenly been forced out of second place by 2 freshmen. This result was difficult for her to accept. After all, she had spent a lot of energy and effort earning those monster cores. She couldn't imagine how the 2 newly entered non-saint freshmen could have gotten so many monster cores. At that moment, an extremely beautiful girl walked up to Jing Mingyu and intimately hugged her arms around Jing Mingyu's waist. Laughing, she said, "Sister Jing, you hadn't imagined that you would have been forced down from second place by 2 new freshmen, right?" Jing Mingyu sighed and bitterly smiled. "It's really unfathomable. Those 2 freshmen haven't even reached saint level, and yet they were able to gain so many monster cores. The 2 of them even forced Kargath Academy's #1 expert, Bogatti, down to 3rd place. I really have no clue how they got their hands on so many monster cores. Could it really be possible that they had brought them in from outside?" The girl giggled in response. "Sister Jing, you've guessed wrongly. I believe that those Class 2 monster cores were earned from their own strength, not from outside as you suspect." The girl's words made Jing Mingyu start. Jing Mingyu turned around and glanced doubtfully at the girl, and asked in a curious tone, "Xiaolu, why do you say that?" The girl smiled mysteriously, as she showed a prideful expression. In a low voice she said, "Sister Jing, I encountered those 2 in the 2nd region, and even stayed with them for an entire day. You cannot underestimate them. They're both very formidable. Especially that Chongyang Xiang Tian. He managed to kill quite a few Class 1 magical beasts with a lousy iron rod by piercing them directly through the throat." "Really?" Jing Mingyu asked in shock, obviously not believing it. "Of course I saw it with my own eyes. There's no way it'd be false." The girl puffed out her chest and said firmly, "Also that night, we encountered a secret attack from 20+ blue wolves. The 2 of them effortlessly killed all of them." "What? You said that the 2 of them managed to kill 20+ blue wolves by themselves?" Hearing this, Jing Mingyu could no longer hide her shock. Although she was already a high-level saint, she would still flee if she faced 20+ Class 1 magical beasts, let alone kill them. The girl vigorously nodded and said, "That's right, Sister Jing. I personally witnessed it. Although Chongyang Xiang Tian and Tai Ta haven't condensed their saint weapons, their strength is definitely not any weaker than a saint's. That's why I can promise that the monster cores in their hands are definitely not brought in from the outside." Hearing this, Jing Mingyu lowered her head and thought it over seriously. Despite the fact that Jian Chen and Tai Ta had forced her out of the top 3 places, she didn't show a trace of dissatisfaction in her expression. From this alone, it could be seen that Jing Mingyu was not a narrow-minded person. After the evaluation had finished, the awards ceremony began. This time, the event's top 3 places for both Class 1 monster cores and Class 2 monster cores would receive the same rewards. The first place reward was a Class 4 monster core and a Medal of Honor completely made from purple coins. Both second place and third place rewards included 1 Class 3 monster core and a Medal of Honor made from gold coins. These medals weren't worth much money, but what they represented was of extraordinary significance. Thus, even the nobles that had powerful backgrounds couldn't keep their eyes from reddening at those medals of honor. Jian Chen and Tai Ta had taken the first 2 places for both Class 1 monster cores and Class 2 monster cores, and thus earned twice the amount of rewards. Third place for Class 1 monster cores was still Mu Tian, and third place for Class 2 monster cores was Kargath Academy's #1 expert, Bogatti. After the award ceremony had finished, Jian Chen could not help but smile excitedly at the surging, pure power in the Class 4 monster core he held in his hand. With the Class 4 monster core, as well as the 200+ monster cores in his space belt, he had enough to last him for a long time. Based on Jian Chen's calculations, he wouldn't have to worry about not having monster cores to use for at least a year. Chapter 53. Becoming a saint. After the award ceremony finished, the students at the sports field gradually began to leave, dispersing until there was absolutely nobody left. During the past 3 days of fighting against the magical beasts in the forest, almost all of the students had numerous injuries. Now that the award ceremony was over, everyone returned back to their own dorms to treat their injuries. The only people left in the sports field were the completely uninjured students that had given up on the task ages ago. However, after experiencing this event, Jian Chen's and Tai Ta's reputations in Kargath Academy had reached its peak form. They had already become the greatest stars in the academy. No matter where one went, their names could be heard being discussed. Jian Chen and Tai Ta, as well as Chong Yang, whose group of 3, bid each other farewell, and returned to their own dorms to treat their injuries as well. In the center of the academy was a tall tower around 100 square meters large. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en was currently respectfully standing in the center of a room on the top of the tower. In front of him sat Kargath Academy's headmaster, lazily sitting in front of the office desk, with a smiling expression. His profound gaze also had hints of happiness and excitement reflected in them. Ah, Bai-en, it seems that a genius really has appeared in Kargath Academy this time. The headmaster excitedly said with a smile. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en nodded and smiled back. Headmaster, that is not correct. This time, Kargath Academy has more than one genius. Rather, there are 2. These 2 are Chongyang Xiangtian and Tai Ta. The headmaster shook his head and smiled. No, it isn't wrong. Tai Ta's talent is definitely extremely high, and he also has godly strength. However, compared to Chongyang Xiangtian, he still has a long ways to go. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en was surprised at this response, and he asked doubtfully, Headmaster, why do you say that? The headmaster let out a long sigh and said, You definitely cannot underestimate Chongyang Xiangtian. He is quite a complicated person. No wonder the old fellow at Chongyang clan kept praising him. Actually, yesterday afternoon, after I had heard the news that Chongyang Xiangtian and Tai Ta had killed a Class 2 magical beast in the 3rd region, I personally rushed over myself to secretly watch them. Although those 2 aren't saints yet, their combat abilities cannot be underestimated. Especially Chongyang Xiangtian, with just a broken iron rod, he was pretty much invincible in the 3rd region. Not only are his movements incomparably fast, they are also extremely precise. His battle experience is not anything alike to a 15-year-old youth's. On the contrary, it seems as if he's a person that has fought 100 battles already. The Class 2 monster cores in the 2's hands were pretty much completely killed by Chongyang Xiangtian alone. Tai Ta was simply involved in the fights. Hearing this, the Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en gave an incredulous look and asked, Headmaster, is Chongyang Xiangtian really as formidable as you say? The headmaster nodded and said, If I hadn't personally witnessed it, I wouldn't believe that a 15-year-old could have such powerful strength either. The most important part is his extensive battle experience and combat techniques. These are not something that can be learned just because one wants to learn it. Without experiencing hundreds of battles, these concepts just cannot be grasped. It's no wonder that old man Chong praised Chongyang Xiangtian so much. He really is an extremely talented genius. It seems these things were all taught by the old man. The Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en looked relieved as he said, Under the great Master Chang's guidance, Chongyang Xiangtian would find it difficult to not be renowned. The headmaster nodded and said, Even if old man Chong is guiding from the sidelines, if Chongyang Xiangtian didn't originally have such outstanding talent, then even old man Chong wouldn't be able to teach him much, even under careful teaching. If Chongyang Xiangtian wasn't Chongyang clan's 4th master, I would really make him my apprentice. After all, such geniuses are rare. If he continues to mature like this, it would be fortunate for Jessen Kingdom. After the award ceremony, Jian Chen retrieved a new uniform and then took a shower to completely wash off all of the filth on his body that he had gained from the few days in the forest. After he wore the brand new uniform, he felt refreshed as he headed back the dorm. Although he had battled virtually every single moment during his 3 days in the forest, he didn't show any traces of exhaustion. In his previous world, he had experienced even worse conditions. After returning to his room, Jian Chen sat cross-legged on his bed. He held a Class 1 monster core in each hand, and began to cultivate. Although Jian Chen's power had already reached the peak of the 10th Saint Force layer, he could clearly sense that the Saint Force in his body had not yet reached a state of saturation. As he gradually began to absorb the energy within the monster cores, Jian Chen's Saint Force once again quickly rose. His speed of cultivation was 10 times faster than when he absorbed World Essence. For the next 3 days, aside from eating meals, Jian Chen used all of his time to cultivate in his room. Eventually, the Saint Force inside him had already reached a saturated state. No matter how much further Jian Chen tried to absorb the monster core's energies, his inner Saint Force would no longer continue to grow. Jian Chen clearly understood that he needed to rush to Saint level and condense his Saint weapon. Otherwise, the saint force within him would come to an eternal standstill. In terms of condensing saint weapons, Jian Chen had long since clearly learned the procedures to becoming saint from the school library. It used the principle of condensing all inner saint force and slowly shaping it into a saint weapon. In the end, one uses their soul to perfectly harmonize with it. Once the inner saint force is completely condensed into a weapon, then a person is officially a saint. Jian Chen didn't stop. He took out a Class 4 monster core from his space belt, preparing to use it if needed, and immediately began to condense a saint weapon and rush to saint level. The saint force in Jian Chen's dantian was firmly contained by his soul. In the presence of his powerful soul, Jian Chen had absolute control over the saint force in his dantian. Jian Chen used his mind to control all the saint force within his dantian and gradually began to gather it together. Slowly, he formed it into the shape of a sword, and he finally began to compress it. Jian Chen's powerful soul was brought over from his previous world. Since birth, it far surpassed other people's, and under this power, the weak saint force had no way of resisting it. The saint force was firmly suppressed by Jian Chen, and he constantly compressed the sword-shaped saint force. As the saint force was compressed smaller and smaller, Jian Chen's dantian that was originally filled with saint force quickly began to lessen as well. Despite this, the strength of his saint force continued to rise, and the makeshift sword became clearer in form as well. Eventually, it became an extremely tiny sword within his dantian. At the same time, Jian Chen was still trying to condense it even more. Although Jian Chen had already successfully gathered and condensed his saint force into a sword, this didn't mean that he had already become a saint. There was still the last and most difficult step left. This step was precisely what blocked so many people in Tianyun continent from becoming saints for the rest of their lives. In this last step, he had to merge a part of his soul into his dantian to completely condense and form the sword and create a spiritual relationship with it. At the same time, he would have to completely harmonize with the saint weapon. Although this seemed simple, it was extremely difficult to do in reality. Although this step was difficult for most people, to those that had incomparably strong souls like Jian Chen, this was something that could be smoothly performed. Jian Chen directly split a part of his soul and began to merge it with the condensed saint weapon in his dantian. He then used his practice control to quickly link the two together. Eventually, the two had completely harmonized. They were no longer separate entities. It was at this moment that Jian Chen had finally become a legitimate saint. This last step had provided absolutely no obstruction to him. Just as Jian Chen had perfectly harmonized his soul and his saint weapon, he suddenly felt something strange, as if the condensed sword within him had become his own limb. He could easily control it, and he could also clearly sense every single component of this sword. Right now, Jian Chen's dantian didn't have a single trace of saint force remaining inside it. The only thing left was the condensed sword, which acted as the new energy source. The sword seemed extremely tiny. From its width and length, it didn't seem very different from an embroidery needle. Now that he had condensed his saint weapon, Jian Chen could sense the powerful fluctuations from saint weapons far clearer than he had before. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that as an ordinary saint, he could easily defeat a person at the peak of the 10th saint force layer. Unless some unexpected or special circumstances occurred, a person at the peak of the 10th layer would absolutely be no match for a saint. Both Jian Chen and Tai Ta were amazing. With Tai Ta's godly strength, as well as his extremely powerful body, even Jian Chen, who had been training saint force since he was young, was naturally not as powerful as Tai Ta. Tai Ta's abnormal strength in addition to his formidable defense was enough to make up for any lack of saint force. Unless the difference in strength was extremely large, there was no way he could be a match against Tai Ta. At most, they would be stuck at a standstill. Jian Chen had previously used his power at the peak 10th layer to defeat a middle-ranked saint. Although he had completely relied on the experience and battle techniques from his past world, Jian Chen's quick sword techniques and his high accomplishments in the ways of the sword, as well as his fighting willpower gained from countless experiences from life-or-death battles in his previous world, were enough to make him invincible to those at the same level as him. In addition, battles with ranks higher than him weren't even worth mentioning either. At this moment, Jian Chen's expression suddenly changed. Immediately following, his dantian had surprisingly begun to tremble once more. His entire dantian began to fluctuate intensely in an unstable way. As soon as it began fluctuating, before Jian Chen could react, the world essence began to frantically burst forth. The countless surrounding world essence seemed to have been affected by some invisible attractive force, and gradually began to gather where Jian Chen was. At this moment, Jian Chen's body seemed to have left his control, and it felt as though all of his pores had suddenly opened. They frantically began absorbing the dense world essence surrounding him. The energy within the monster core in Jian Chen's hand also fiercely dropped, forming a stream of energy visible to the naked eye which flowed into Jian Chen's body. At this moment, Jian Chen's body was like a bottomless pit. It didn't matter how strong the world essence around him was, it was completely absorbed into his body like a whale swallowing water. At the same time, the energy of the Class 4 monster core in his hand rapidly diminished, and the speed at which it was being absorbed was unbelievable. The originally fist-sized monster core was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 54. Mutation of the Dantian. Jian Chen had no idea what was happening to his body at all. Since he had lost total control over his body, he was completely unable to stop the absorption of the world essence around him. Feeling his own body absorbing the world essence at such a frightening speed, Jian Chen still maintained a determination of steel despite feeling slightly pressed for time. If his body continued to absorb the world essence at this rate, it was unknown how much longer his body would be able to last before it exploded from the sudden increase of concentrated qi. But what puzzled Jian Chen the most was that he had no idea how this happened to begin with. Why did his Dantian suddenly start to absorb the world essence out of the blue at such a remarkable speed? This left Jian Chen with no small amount of terror. He knew in his heart that the world essence around him was rapidly congregating and the area around him became like a storm as it flowed at a frantic speed. The gale of qi roared and whistled throughout Kargath Academy as both leaves and loose rocks were sent flying into the air. But when the world essence entered Jian Chen's Dantian, it was as if he threw a rock into the ocean, as the world essence assimilated into his body, leaving no indication that it was there to begin with. For that reason, Jian Chen let out a sigh of relief. Although he didn't know what had caused his Dantian to go through such a dramatic change, he was glad that his body wouldn't explode from the world essence. At the same time, within the high central tower of Kargath Academy, the headmaster of the academy suddenly cried out in shock. "What's happening? The world essence is fluctuating in such a violent way." As he spoke, the headmaster had already flew out of the window, leaving behind an after image. The moment he flew through the window, he soared into the sky at an extreme speed and immediately found himself at the dorm room of Jian Chen after a few seconds. He looked at the dorm with doubt and puzzlement as he continued to stare at the room. Meanwhile, a streak of white light came blurring over and stopped a few hundred meters behind the headmaster. It was the vice-headmaster, Bai En. Even after the arrival of Bai En, another dozen people came flying over in rapid succession before coming to a stop behind Bai En to look at where the world essence was congregating at. They were all teachers of the academy with strength stronger than most, and so with the violent fluctuations of the world essence, there would be no way at all for them to not notice. Bai En looked at the amassed world essence with amazement as he cried out in wonder. "Headmaster, what has happened here? Why has the world essence gathered itself in this area?" Although the headmaster's face looked focused, his eyes were staring blankly as he replied, "Even I don't know what has happened here, let's go find out." With that, the headmaster plummeted down to the ground with Bai En following right behind him. "The rest of you stay here. Do not allow anyone else to come close," he called out to the teachers. All the teachers wanted to follow the headmaster to find out the answer to this mystery. But with the words of Bai En, the teachers stopped their initial momentum and returned to their original spots obediently. When it came to Bai En, no teacher dared to violate his commands. Quickly, both the headmaster and Bai En arrived outside of the door to Jian Chen's room, where the world essence was inside. As Bai En silently knocked onto the door, it suddenly smashed into pieces and the scene inside was projected towards the two. Inside, they saw Jian Chen sitting crossed-legged on his bed with his eyes closed as he continued to cultivate. The world essence was still being absorbed into his Dantian with such a terrifying speed that it made his body outline blurry as a fog concealed him slightly. Seeing this phenomenon, both Bai En and the headmaster were speechless. They never would have thought that the world essence being concentrated here was because of a single person's cultivation. Not only that, but they were stunned by the amazing speed at which Jian Chen was absorbing the world essence. So it was Changyang Xiang Tian. How could this be possible with his strength? How could he bring about such an effect like this? Bai En cried out in shock as he watched what was inconceivable to him. Even the headmaster was trembling as his eyes stared deeply at Jian Chen. After a good while, he let out a sigh. "This kid is not ordinary at all." Hearing the headmaster, Bai En nodded his head in complete belief in the headmaster. In his heart, He had always known that Jian Chen was never an ordinary student.
"Headmaster, what should we do now then?"
he asked.
"We wait,"
came the reply. And so, the headmaster and vice-headmaster stood outside Jian Chen's room and waited for him to reawaken. They didn't enter his room, and didn't make a sound, almost as if they were afraid of accidentally disturbing the cultivating Jian Chen. Jian Chen had long since been aware that his door had been smashed apart, but he wasn't able to move both his body and mouth since he wasn't in control. And the Class 4 monster core gripped tightly in his hand was visibly smaller now to the naked eye. Its size already roughly the same size of a ping-pong ball.
All of the energy and world essence that was being absorbed into Jian Chen's dantian disappeared like a stone falling into the ocean without leaving behind a single ripple of water behind.
Regarding this situation within his dantian, Jian Chen was absolutely clueless and didn't understand where all of the world essence was going. Soon after some time had passed, the energy in the Class 4 monster core was completely absorbed by him. Finally, within his dantian, a change was happening as light specks of both azure and violet started to appear.
The moment the specks appeared, his dantian suddenly started to absorb the world essence at an even faster rate, and even started to absorb world essence from a farther distance. With the azure and violet light specks, world essence from a dozen feet away felt the pull and began to rush towards Jian Chen before being absorbed through the pores in his body and into the glowing specks. Because of Jian Chen's fast absorption rate of the world essence, a faint white mist was clearly noticeable to the naked eye as it surrounded him. Because of this white mist, his own body was only faintly discernible, making both him and the area around him seem much more mysterious than before.
The increase in the rate of absorption did not go unnoticed by the two men standing outside of the door. Staring at each other in the eye, they were both astonished at what they were both seeing. By this point, the entire Kargath Academy was aware of the sudden influx of world essence, but aside from the teachers, each and every student took it to be a sudden gust of wind, and took no more notice to it. Jian Chen's dantian continued to absorb the world essence for half the day before finally stopping. Jian Chen completely absorbed all of the world essence dozens of kilometers away. At the moment, aside from the completed sword made from his condensed saint force, Jian Chen's dantian also contained azure and violet specks of light. The specks were extremely small, and they had extremely faint glows as well. The way they flickered made it seem like they would burn out at any moment. Probing the azure and violet specks of light that had just appeared within his dantian, Jian Chen's heart momentarily grew heavy. This was the first time he had ever encountered an uncontrollable circumstance within the dantian. He had no desire to encounter such an issue. However, what he could say for certain was that these azure and violet light specks were definitely related to the uncontrollably crazy absorption of the world essence that he had experienced earlier. Could it be that these azure and violet lights are completely made of the world essence from before? Jian Chen secretly guessed.
The great amount of world essence that had entered his dantian before had completely disappeared without a trace, like a rock in the large sea.
This was something completely unfathomable. In addition, after absorbing that vast amount of world essence, these strange light specks had appeared within his dantian. This made it obvious to Jian Chen that the two events were connected. However, what made Jian Chen really doubtful and worried was the question. What exactly were those strange light specks within his dantian, and what did they do? Would their existence be of any harm to him? These were the questions Jian Chen was currently most concerned about. The latter question particularly made him feel unrest. After hesitating for a bit, Jian Chen finally tried attempting to control the azure and violet lights. However, after a few experiments, his mood became more and more serious. After some internal inspections, although he could clearly see the specks of light, every time he tried to manipulate them, he would suddenly discover that the light specks existing within his dantian would become similar to mirages. He could easily pass through them, and was completely unable to grab a hold of them and put them under his control. It was as if they didn't really exist. To every cultivating person, the dantian was an extremely important part of the body. Jian Chen definitely did not wish to see his dantian go through some situation beyond his control. Otherwise, for all he knew, it could prove to be fatal during some critical moment later.
AI whatever.
Whether it's good or bad, it's not like I can do anything about it. I'm a person who has died once already anyways. Why should I care about these things? Jian Chen soon came to the conclusion that he wouldn't bother toiling over the strange changes in his dantian any longer. Since the circumstances were beyond his control, he could only calmly accept them. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes, his gaze perfectly calm. Although successfully becoming a saint was an exciting achievement, Because an uncontrollable circumstance had occurred within his dantian, he could not bring himself to be happy. Just as Jian Chen opened his eyes, the headmaster and vice-headmaster that had been waiting outside the whole time walked in together. Seeing the headmaster walk in, Jian Chen quickly got off the bed and greeted them. "Headmaster, vice-headmaster." The headmaster had a wide smile across his face as he steadily looked at Jian Chen. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, the world essence you just released was abnormal. Did you encounter any problems during your cultivation? If so, don't hold yourself back and tell me. Perhaps I can help you." The headmaster said in a tone of great concern. "Thank you for your concern, headmaster. Everything has been going well, as I haven't yet encountered any problems." Jian Chen calmly said. He didn't think his dantian situation was something that the headmaster could resolve, saying it would only stir up trouble, and it was better to just stay silent. Chapter 55. The Emperor's Recognition. The headmaster laughed joyously. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, it looks like you've broken through to become a saint." Jian Chen nodded his head slightly and said, "Yes, I have only just condensed my saint weapon. And yet, I am still not sure if you've become an upper-level saint or a middle-level saint." The headmaster beamed. To him, Jian Chen was at the very least the same strength as a middle-level saint. After all, he had personally seen such a tremendous amount of world essence be absorbed by him. Although he didn't know what type of method Jian Chen had used to absorb it all, but he at the very least understood that after absorbing this much world essence, there was no way Jian Chen would only be at the primary saint level. To see Jian Chen immediately cross over the primary level to the middle level of sainthood, the headmaster couldn't help but be extremely happy. With this, his Kargath Academy could finally be proud of having such a talented student. "Headmaster, I've only just condensed a saint weapon, so my strength should definitely be at the primary level." Jian Chen knew that the headmaster believed he had completely absorbed all of the world essence and asked him this question for that reason. "Primary level," a voice cried. This time it wasn't the headmaster who spoke, but Bai En, who was standing behind him with a look of disbelief. "How could that be? You've absorbed such an enormous amount of world essence, so how could you only be at the primary saint level?" "I also don't know." Jian Chen's face let out a bitter smile. He didn't intend to reveal the things that happened in his own dantian. "Okay, since Chongyang Xiang Tian is fine, then we should leave." The headmaster's gaze was directed at Jian Chen as he said, "Chongyang Xiang Tian, right now you have just become a saint, and you should properly familiarize yourself with your saint weapon's uses." After saying these words, the two people, headmaster and vice-headmaster, left Jian Chen's room. After leaving the dormitories, Vice-Headmaster Bai En with a face full of curiosity asked, "Headmaster, Chongyang Xiang Tian obviously absorbed a colossal amount of world essence. How could he still only stay at the primary saint level? This just doesn't make sense." When he heard this, the headmaster slightly nodded his head and said, "Yes, it certainly doesn't abide to common sense, or there might be a secret Chongyang Xiang Tian has that we do not know of. Otherwise, how could he absorb all the world essence dozens kilometers away? It's obviously an impossible task." After saying this, the headmaster paused for a moment, then continued, "This matter is something that we should not pry into. From now on, for any matters concerning Chongyang Xiang Tian, as long as it doesn't cause too much of a ruckus, we shouldn't interfere. Let him grow as he wishes, as a genius path is usually made by himself. If they don't weather the storm, they will never truly grow, and with only peaceful times, they will eventually wane." "Yes, Bai En understands," the vice-headmaster answered respectfully. His mind was clear. In order to cultivate a genius, this would do whatever Kargath Academy would have to do. The headmaster stared off into the azure sky as he muttered to himself, "Chongyang Xiang Tian is 15 years old this year. To reach sainthood by his 15th year would cause quite a shock throughout the Tianyuan continent. It really does look like Chongyang Xiang Tian is a true genius, so I truly hope he continues down his path and does not die a premature death. Otherwise, this would be a heavy loss for our Jessen kingdom. AI. It's a shame the ancestor of the Chongyang clan has been missing for 100 years. If he was still alive, then his plan might have succeeded." After the headmaster left, Jian Chen continued to sit cross-legged on the bed once more and observe the azure and violet glow within his dantian. He let out a sigh. Not only did he not know what was the matter with the glows, but he also had no control over them. With another sigh, Jian Chen decided to forget about them since it would waste precious time if he did. He had already died once and already experienced many things. Aside from the maternal love he felt for his mother by Yun Tian, there wasn't much else Jian Chen cared about. Jian Chen sucked in a deep breath and slowly calmed himself,
concentrating deeply on his right hand. His heart thumped before a strong source of energy flashed as a slender long sword appeared in his right hand. The long sword was unusually thin and the entire body was a silver white, almost like a mirror that reflected the surrounding area on the blade.
The sword was around 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide. Engraved on the blade next to the hilt were 2 words: Light Wind. This sword's appearance was almost exactly like Jian Chen's treasured sword in his previous life. Even the name itself was the exact same one, called the Light Wind Sword. Jian Chen's way of the sword placed a strong emphasis on quickness and agility.
With the ability to strike in 1,000 different ways, he was like the wind that came in without a shadow and left without a footprint.
Holding on to the Light Wind Sword, Jian Chen couldn't help but smile tremendously.
At the moment where he grasped onto the sword, he felt the familiarity he had with his previous world come rushing back to him.
However, the only difference was that Jian Chen felt that the sword was like an extension of his arm. He didn't need to expend as much strength to control it. Jian Chen could also feel his soul connecting with the sword to establish a perfect relationship between the two. The two were one and no longer divided. This was a feeling he had never felt before in his previous world. Jian Chen jabbed out with his sword, letting the silver blade flash as it shot outwards. Ding!
A clear sound was heard as the Light Wind Sword whistled in the air. It would appear that this sword was on the same level as the ones refined from the finest of iron.
Jian Chen gently caressed the blade with his left hand joyfully as if the sword was his most favorite person. To any true swordsman, the sword was the item they were the most fond of and could not replace. The sword was their life and their soul, and Jian Chen was a firm believer of that as well. When Jian Chen summoned the Light Wind Sword, it had disappeared from within his dantian and the energy had been completely concentrated onto his hand to form the blade in real life. Not only was this sword able to deal out major damage, but this was also the source of Jian Chen's energy and replaced his dantian as the source. Jian Chen's heart thumped once more as the sword started to disappear and returned to his dantian as the mini version of the Light Wind Sword. 2 days after Jian Chen had broken through to sainthood, he had spent the time observing the 2 colored glows within his dantian. Other than that, he spent most of the time in the library in order to find a book that would help shed some light on the situation with his dantian. However, he always came up empty-handed. During those 2 days, Jian Chen's breakthrough to sainthood had been passed around through the academy like a great wave since they all knew Jian Chen had gotten to that level too fast. Every student at Kargath Academy knew that he had joined the academy a few months ago at the 8th Saint Force layer. And after those few months, he had suddenly broken through to become a saint. This type of cultivation speed was far too fast, causing everyone to cry out in astonishment. This record had completely squashed out the previous #1 cultivation genius Changming Xiang. Far away from Kargath Academy in a splendid dazzling palace, a jewel-embedded robe-wearing middle-aged man sat in the middle of the study room while reading a book. "Your Majesty, a message courier has arrived." A respectful but deep voice called out from outside the room. Hearing that, the middle-aged man slowly put down his book and looked towards the entrance of his room. "Come in," he stated. This middle-aged man was the emperor of the Jessen kingdom. Called a senator as the emperor spoke, the doors to the study room opened, and a man wearing a black pow entered. He was approximately 30 years old and quickly walked into the room. When he was within 30 steps away from the emperor, he immediately stopped where he was and knelt down onto his knees. "Your Majesty, a letter just came from Headmaster Cafe Air in Kargath Academy." Originally, the emperor didn't care at all for the letter, but the moment he had heard the name Cafe Air, his face immediately grew solemn and placed the book down onto the table. "Bring me the message now." "Yes, Your Majesty." A nearby bodyguard standing next to the emperor respectfully responded. He immediately took the letter in his hand and closely inspected it. Only after confirming there were no problems with it did he walk up and hand it over to the emperor. The emperor took the letter and immediately opened it. His calm face gradually began to form a smile as he murmured, "This Chongyang Xiang Tian is indeed a heavenly genius. Not only did he defeat a saint while being at the 8th Saint Force layer, he also managed to defeat a middle-ranked saint when he was only at the 10th layer. Moreover, he had successfully condensed his saint weapon at the age of 15. This is definitely a genius. It's no wonder that he received so much praise from Uncle. With Uncle's insight, he naturally can distinguish certain people. If Uncle recommends Chongyang Xiang Tian to this extent, then I should be doing something about it as well. Chongyang Xiang Tian has the Chongyang clan backing him, even more so since he's the fourth master. It looks like getting a hold of him will be impossible. In that case, I can only try my hardest to seduce him. Although the Chongyang clan has already been silent for a dozen years, the inside information about their clan is still true. Their strength cannot be underestimated, and is enough for me to act. Since it is so, I'll just do this. The emperor seemed to have decided on something as he immediately said, "Servants, fetch me pen and ink." Soon afterwards, the chamberlain arrived with the pen and ink ready. The emperor grasped the pen and began to smoothly write out his words. He delicately picked up the paper and reread the words written on it, before slowly folding it up and leaving the study. With the scroll in hand, the emperor was escorted by a group of guards sticking tightly to him through layers after layers of halls, before finally entering a beautiful courtyard. When the emperor had just stepped into the courtyard, a 50 to 60-year-old elder came out from a room within the courtyard. He calmly looked at the emperor and smiled. "So it was your majesty that had arrived. Please come in." The emperor walked up to the elder, not yet entering the room. He handed the scroll in his hand to the elder, and solemnly said, "Senior Yi Ming, this is an extremely important letter that I want you to personally deliver to Lore City's Chongyang clan." Hearing this, the elder's face grew more serious. He reached out to receive the scroll from the emperor's hand and said, "Your Majesty, don't worry. I will definitely deliver this letter." The elder clearly understood that since he was being sent to personally deliver the letter, it definitely was not just about a simple matter. After the letter in his hand was sent out, the emperor inwardly sighed, as he thought to himself, "You heir, for the sake of our kingdom's development, for the sake of our kingdom's future, your father has no choice but to sacrifice you." Chapter 56. 7th level of the library. Early next morning, the cross-legged Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes. He had not been cultivating for the past 2 days, and instead was spending his days at the library reading books. Every night, he immersed himself with trying to understand the sword within his dantian, in order to learn to use his saint weapon as efficiently as possible. After all, Jian Chen had only recently broken through to sainthood, and even though the saint weapon within him was connected to his mind, he still didn't know how to use the saint weapon to perfection. Jian Chen, who had experience from the previous world, still found the saint weapon in this world a fresh new experience. If he didn't spend his time familiarizing himself with it, then even connecting his soul with his saint weapon like he did with a tree branch, it would still be very hard to show off the pinnacle of his strength. The reason for this was the same as a person had a severed arm for 10 to 20 years, but the arm suddenly grew back. Since that person was familiar with living with a severed arm and now had to face the newly grown arm, they would also be a bit unfamiliar to his condition. This development required time to slowly accept and become comfortable with. Standing up from his bed, Jian Chen walked out of his room and headed towards the dining halls. Then, as per usual, after eating, he headed to the library. The doors to the library were already open, but there weren't many people inside. Just the regular janitorial lady. Jian Chen looked at the nearly empty library and then walked towards the 5th level of the library. For the past few days, all of the books he had been interested in from the 1st to 4th level have all been completely read by him. The library had a total of 7 levels. The first 2 levels could be accessed by anyone below the saint level, while the 3rd and 4th levels would be open to those who broke through to the saint level. The 5th level of the library wasn't open to any student except for the freshman champion, so for those who wanted to read the books from that level, they would have to be a teacher from the academy. The 6th and 7th layer of the library was protected by very strong bindings, and only the headmaster and vice-headmaster could enter. For those who wanted to enter, they would need the strict approval of either the headmaster or vice-headmaster first. Even though the 5th story of the library wasn't open to the students, Jian Chen, who had achieved the 1st place in the freshman competition, could freely enter the 5th level. The amount of space the 5th level occupied wasn't really that big, and the number of books weren't very many either. If you added them all up, the number was barely 100, which was incomparable to the 10,000s of books that the 1st level had. But Jian Chen knew that any one of these 100 books had a value far greater than any of the books he had ever read before. The 5th level of the library was very quiet. Although not many people visited it, Jian Chen could see that this place was cleaned by someone very often. The entire room was clean. One wouldn't be able to find a single speck of dust in it. Jian Chen walked towards the bookshelves and selected a book on cultivation before walking back towards the table. The contents of the book were only about cultivation. Although he didn't know if the contents of the book would help him with his problem, it would at least enrich his mind with other information he deemed helpful. Jian Chen was extremely invested in reading, to the point of addiction. Although the information recorded inside the book had almost nothing that could help him, it still helped open his eyes and broadened his horizons to a whole new world of cultivation. The information he saw was about things he could never think about before in his past life. The information on cultivation written inside the book wasn't too profound and only had a few dozen pages, so he quickly finished the book. After reading it, Jian Chen placed the book back onto the bookshelves and started to mutter to himself, as if he was trying to commit the knowledge to memory. After carefully putting the book back in its original location, Jian Chen grabbed another book and started to repeat the process of reading once more. Within the 5th level of the library, practically all of the books were left behind by predecessors to help people with cultivation techniques. However, the majority of these cultivation techniques were not too strong. Most of them were barely above the primary earth tier level. The time slowly went by, as Jian Chen resided on the 5th level to read book after book. He had completely forgotten about the time. He hadn't noticed that he was no longer alone, as 2 other middle-aged men appeared. Just one look at the 2 was enough to tell that these were teachers of the academy. The 2 middle-aged men appeared to know Jian Chen. When they saw him, their eyes let out a very surprised look. However, they did not make a sound to avoid disturbing him. Just then, an old man wearing a light blue and luxurious Chong Pao walked up from below. He looked to be in his 50s or 60s. His hair was as white as a crane, but his appearance was like that of a young man. He had a mysterious expression that constantly flashed in his eyes. The 5th level of the library wasn't too big, and so after the elderly man entered the 5th level of the library, he promptly walked to the side to get to the staircase that would lead to the 6th layer. All of a sudden, he had noticed a young child out of the corner of his eye. The elderly man came to a sudden stop as he sized up the child in his head. Immediately recognizing the academy uniform on the tall but slender child, he realized with a start, Chongyang Xiang Tian. Jian Chen was immediately brought back to his senses and looked back to the old man who had called him. His face was a little sluggish before he jolted to his feet with a smile. "Headmaster, why have you come here?" This man was the headmaster of Kargath Academy. The headmaster's voice had simultaneously startled the 2 teachers. The moment they saw the headmaster, they looked startled and placed their books down onto the table before standing up. Cupping their hands to salute the headmaster, they called out respectfully, "We greet the headmaster." The headmaster of Kargath Academy was a well-known figure whose name resounded throughout the Jessan Kingdom. His strength was on the level of a Heaven Saint Master, and he was one of the 6 strongest individuals of the Jessan Kingdom. A Heaven Saint Master on the Tian Yuan continent was still regarded as a very strong and valiant person. The headmaster's gaze swept across the 2 middle-aged men and waved his hand as he said, "Don't mind me, please continue reading your books." "Yes, headmaster." The 2 middle-aged men immediately sat down again, though they didn't have the spirit to concentrate on the books in their hands. The headmaster's eyes glanced over the book within Jian Chen's hand. With a smile as he nodded his head in satisfaction, he said with a gratified tone, "Chongyang Xiang Tian, do you like this library?" Jian Chen nodded his head without hesitation. "That's right. From this library, I can learn many different things. Even if the information here provides little to no help to someone, it'll still increase one's knowledge." Hearing Jian Chen, the headmaster looked at him with admiration. "Good. Chongyang Xiang Tian, someone with your understanding and logic is hard to come by. Since you enjoy being in this library, then let me help you. Come with me." Turning around, the headmaster started to walk towards the stairway to the 6th level. Seeing the direction that the headmaster was heading in, Jian Chen fully understood the old man's meaning and was overjoyed. He immediately returned the book in his hand to the original position, and followed behind the headmaster toward the 6th level of the library. Seeing Jian Chen disappear off into the staircase, the 2 teachers looked at his direction with some envy. The 6th and 7th levels of the library could only be accessed by the headmaster and the vice-headmaster. Those who wanted access needed the approval of one of the 2 first. When it came to the 6th and 7th levels of the library, these were the areas that every single teacher of the academy wanted to go to, mostly because those 2 levels contained high-level techniques. Not only that, but the other books in that level had rich information pertaining to many other fields. Most importantly, on the 6th and 7th levels of the library, there were records of many of the different types of spiritual treasures on the Tian Yuan continent. Very quickly, Jian Chen followed the headmaster to the entrance of the 6th level. Jian Chen could clearly see the transparent bindings keeping the door shut. The bindings of the 6th level and the 7th level are all arranged by the previous generations of headmasters. The defense is very strong, and even if it is a Heaven Saint Master, it is impossible to break it within a short period of time. The headmaster's tone carried a bit of pride, and he immediately took out a token constructed from purple coin. The token had very complicated markings on it, and it seemed to be a design of some sort. The purple coin token in the headmaster's hands released a faint purple glow, and soon the purple glow grew more and more bright. At last, a ray of light like a material substance shot out and directly landed on the bindings. The transparent bindings slowly rippled twice like water, and the center slowly split apart to form a large hole that a person could easily enter through. Chongyang Xiang Tian, follow me inside. The headmaster called out to Jian Chen, and directly walked inside. Jian Chen followed behind the headmaster, and they walked straight through the 6th level onto the 7th level. The library's 7th level was very empty. It was only the size of a typical room, and there was a single wooden table placed in the center. In front of the table was a small bookshelf that had a few thin books. There were 2 boxes on top of the bookshelf. One of the boxes was completely made of extremely precious jade, while the other was entirely made of purple coin. Both of their values were not at all lacking, and it could be seen that the items within these boxes had to be extremely important. Ever since Kargath Academy was first established, this library has always existed. Up until now, it's been here for hundreds of years already. These past few centuries, the number of people aside from the headmaster of each era that have come to this library's 7th level hasn't been small. However, every single one of them was an extremely influential power, if not an impressive expert from the Tianyun continent. You are the first Kargath Academy student to have entered the 7th level these past few centuries. The headmaster explained slowly, with an extremely calm tone. Chongyang Xiang Tian, this library's 7th level is where my Kargath Academy's riches are contained. The entire 7th level is enveloped by a layer of powerful bindings. This layer of bindings were painstakingly created by the Saint Ruler, Brian, the first generation's headmaster. The items within all have special tracers. As long as the bindings aren't broken, there is no way they can be brought outside. In addition, the books inside here were all the books about cultivation methods that Headmaster Brian had collected himself, if not personally written by him. These are Kargath Academy's greatest riches. Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression became extremely serious. He hadn't imagined that the library's 7th level would be so important. The fact that Kargath Academy's first-generation headmaster had actually been a saint ruler that was an exceptional expert was also shocking to Jian Chen. The headmaster's gaze brightly looked at Jian Chen, and his expression changed and he said with a strict tone, Chongyang Xiang Tian, right now I use my authority as the headmaster to allow you to read any book except the one inside the jade box. You only have this one chance. I hope you properly utilize it. Jian Chen solemnly nodded his head. I thank the headmaster for the help. The jade box contains items that would not be of any use to the current you, and it may even obstruct your growth. Therefore, you must not look at the items within the jade box. However, the purple coin box contains a primary heaven-tier cultivation technique that you can read however much you want. However, your Chongyang clan's family heirloom law of Yang Qi isn't any weaker than the Collecting Heart Sutra. Therefore, choosing whatever cultivation method you use isn't something you should be too hasty with. Okay, you can stay here by yourself and take your time to read them. Remember, you only have this once chance to enter the 7th floor of the library. I hope you treasure it. The bindings at the entrance will only prevent the people who are trying to enter. If you want to leave, you can leave directly. After finishing, the headmaster immediately turned and left the place, disappearing outside the bindings on the 7th floor, leaving Jian Chen standing there dazed. Chapter 57. Arranged marriage. Jian Chen took in a deep breath to calm himself down before walking towards the bookshelves. His eyes swept over the shelves one by one before finally taking out a single book. He walked towards the center of the floor to a table and sat down. The book was for those who gained insights as well as techniques for breaking through a bottleneck. Even Earth Saint Masters could benefit from the notes clearly written on it, although there weren't many books on this level, but the quality of the content inside was of the utmost quality. If any one of these books were to be released to the common populace, then it would cause a widespread reign of carnage for it. Jian Chen slowly flipped the pages of the book one by one as he read it. Soon the book was finished off by him, causing Jian Chen to sink into meditation. Whatever book he grabbed had led to his eyes being opened wide to the world of possibilities. The cultivation system in this world had already long since toppled the system in his previous world. With this book, Jian Chen felt like he had a stronger understanding of this world's cultivation system now. Not too long after, Jian Chen had finished reading a dozen books from the shelves.
Half of the books talked about insights on cultivation as well as the problems a cultivator might experience. The other half were books about cultivation techniques, but the strongest of these techniques were only at the upper earth tier level. What Jian Chen had found most helpful was the personal letter from Kargath Academy's first headmaster Brian. Jian Chen's eyes swept over to the purple coin box. According to the headmaster, the purple coin box contained a primary heaven tier technique. Although Jian Chen didn't have a clear idea of how valuable a heaven tier technique was, but he did know that it was still quite the priceless treasure. After all, the heaven tier techniques was the second strongest type of technique on the Tianyuan continent. There was only one other tier higher than it: Saint tier. Jian Chen slowly opened the purple coin box only to see a hand-sized book inside. On top of the cover of the book had words, Collecting Heart Sutra, written on it in bold cursive. The moment the book touched his hand, Jian Chen felt a soft sensation enter his arm. It was almost as if there was a sense of warmth to the book despite it never being touched before. The book was made of some kind of magical beast leather. It was extremely supple and strong, and hard to damage in any way. He slowly took the book out of the box and carefully started to flip through the pages to read it. He was reading it with a serious face since Jian Chen knew that such a strong cultivational technique was extremely rare to come by. Although he didn't initially plan to practice this technique, just looking at it would bring him some benefits at the very least. Though he wasn't sure if he would be able to find something of value within the book to help him with his problem. 4 hours later, Jian Chen's eyes finally moved away from the book as he bowed his head in contemplation. After he was sure he committed the contents of the book to memory, he returned it to the original box and then walked back to the table. His eyes looked at the bookshelves before he let out a sigh. With no small amount of regret, he began to head down the stairs. However, Jian Chen had profited greatly today in the 7th level of the library. On his way down, Jian Chen took a look at the 6th level of the library. Although the books within the 6th level was not as valuable as the 7th level, the profits in the knowledge gained from them were still great. To Jian Chen, the predecessors had imparted their knowledge and insights in those books, so the knowledge would prove to be extremely beneficial. Jian Chen had learned much about the many different spiritual treasures of the Tianyuan continent, something that couldn't be found anywhere on the first 5 levels of the library. By the time Jian Chen had walked out of the library, the sky had already darkened. Unknowingly, he had already spent the entire day inside the library. He'd even forgotten to eat. Growl. At that moment, Jian Chen's stomach unexpectedly made a loud sound. Jian Chen reached down to rub his stomach that was currently so empty that it had begun to hurt a bit. He smiled helplessly, and then started to walk towards the dining hall. After quickly finishing his dinner, Jian Chen went straight back to the dorms. En route, he managed to attract quite a few students' gazes. There were envious, respectful, jealous, and all other types of expressions in their looks. Jian Chen didn't pay any mind to the surrounding attention, and walked to the dorm without a sideways glance. After he entered the dorms, he could see that in the distance, there was a familiar figure standing in front of his room. He felt relieved as he realized it was his older brother, Chongyang-hu. It's so late, and yet Big Brother is waiting for me to return here. Could it be he has something urgent that he really needs to tell me? Jian Chen inwardly guessed. He quickened his pace, and rushed over. Big Brother, it's already so late. Why are you waiting for me here? What is there that cannot wait until tomorrow to discuss? Jian Chen asked as he walked up to Chongyang-hu. Seeing Jian Chen approach, Chongyang-hu's face turned bitter, and he said with a sigh, "Ai, 4th brother, you've finally returned. Where did you run off to today? I pretty much searched the entire school, yet I couldn't find you, so I have been waiting here for the entire day now." Jian Chen said apologetically, "Big Brother, were you looking for me for something extremely important?" Hearing this, Chongyang-hu smiled happily and said in an excited voice, "Of course there's something. Moreover, it's something major. Come, 4th brother, let's enter the room to talk." Jian Chen nodded, and took out the key from his space belt to open the room's door. This room's door was newly replaced, since the old one had been turned to rubble by the vice headmaster. Immediately after they entered the room, Chongyang-hu closed the door, and then urgently said,
Fourth brother, the clan just sent a message. You're so lucky. Your big brother is really envious of you. Hearing this, Jian Chen was puzzled, and he asked in confusion, Big brother, exactly what has happened? Chang Yang, who sat down on Jian Chen's bed, and said with a happy smile, Fourth brother, I guess you don't know yet. Father has already arranged for your marriage. Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression clearly became startled.
After finally returning to his senses, he asked in an incredulous and shocked tone, What?
An arranged marriage.
Chang Yang, who fiercely nodded, and excitedly replied, That's right, fourth brother.
Moreover, your partner is the emperor's third princess, Princess Gulan.
I've heard that this arranged marriage had even been the emperor's own suggestion.
Hearing this, Jian Chen's expression immediately grew more serious. He felt that this situation was extremely abnormal, and moreover, he hadn't agreed to it.
He felt dissatisfied by the fact that his own marriage had been decided by his clan without him.
Having such a fate decided by others made Jian Chen feel extremely disgusted. Seeing Jian Chen's expression, Chang Yang, who thought that Jian Chen was worrying over Princess Gulan's appearance.
He couldn't help but laugh. Fourth brother, don't worry.
Although I've never seen Princess Gulan, I've heard quite a few things about her. Princess Gulan is the emperor's third daughter. She's naturally beautiful, and her looks are enough for cities to fight over her. Since she was young, she's been a gifted genius. She has not only mastered the 4 fine arts, she's also quite a well-known talent in cultivation. At the age of 15, Princess Gulan had reached the 7th Saint Force layer.
She has been doted on quite a lot by the emperor. She is the emperor's beloved person. The emperor loves her dearly in every possible way.
Hearing this, Chang Yang, who sighed, Princess Gulan's identity isn't her only good point. With just her gift at cultivation, even your own older brother couldn't compete with her.
Fourth brother, His Majesty has betrothed the princess to you. This is a stroke of good fortune, so don't have such a sour look on your face.
Jian Chen could only let out a sigh inwardly. Chang Yang, who couldn't understand his thoughts at all. Despite Princess Gulan's beauty, Jian Chen wasn't moved at all. All he wanted to do right now was to improve his own strength. He couldn't afford to waste time with a girl at the moment. Jian Chen also knew that the emperor was aware of his own achievements within Kargath Academy. Otherwise, there was no way the emperor would have been so firm on his decision to betroth his daughter to him. Because this arranged marriage was proposed by the emperor, Jian Chen was absolutely powerless to go against the marriage. His parents wouldn't even dare to give up the chance to establish a friendship with the royal family, let alone a relationship with them. Aside from the emperor taking back the proposal, there would be no way for Jian Chen to refuse it, so he would have to quietly accept it. The only thing that put Jian Chen to ease was the fact that this decision was only just recently made. The official date for the marriage had not yet been announced, meaning the marriage was being put off indefinitely for the time being. This gave him a good time period to breathe. Jian Chen, after all, did not want to talk about this at all. In his previous life, Jian Chen was a wanderer who loved traveling around the world. Without a permanent residence to live in and using the Mother Earth as his bed, with another person by his side, he wouldn't be able to continue to that lifestyle anymore. After Chang Yang, who left, Jian Chen sat on the bed by himself and contemplated deeply. One had to admit that the news from his clan had been too sudden, catching Jian Chen unprepared. I might as well spend the rest of my time cultivating. Power in the end decides everything after all. When my strength grows strong enough, even the emperor would not be able to say anything. Jian Chen sighed as he continued to cultivate. Jian Chen took out a Class 1 monster core from the pile of them within his space ring. He slowly closed his eyes, and began to absorb the power from within the monster core to cultivate it. Ever since he had broken through sainthood 2 days ago, this was the first time he was cultivating. The past 2 evenings, he had been familiarizing himself with how to use and control the saint weapon. Just as Jian Chen started to absorb the energy from within the monster cores, the speed in which the monster core was being absorbed from him was growing faster and faster. Almost as if all control was lost as the energy rushed into him. As the energy frantically rushed into him, the rate had instantly increased to a speed several hundred times faster than normal. The sudden rush in cultivation speed caused Jian Chen's face to twitch in surprise. Although every cultivator greatly desired for their cultivation speed to be increased, but Jian Chen's cultivation speed had already reached a frightening level. With this absorption rate of the energy from the monster core, Jian Chen simply didn't have enough time to refine it, which served no purpose for him at all, since energy that wasn't refined by him was not controllable and would only serve to rebel against him within his own body. An end result like that would lead to consequences in which Jian Chen would have a tough time resolving. Jian Chen immediately stopped absorbing the power from the monster core. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that his process of stopping his absorption of the monster core's energy had gone very smoothly. No frightening and uncontrollable scene had occurred. Otherwise, he was afraid that he really would have gotten into deep trouble. Chapter 58. Annoyance from the Dantian. Jian Chen let out a long breath to still his emotions, as he glanced at the monster core in his hand. Although he hadn't been absorbing the energy from within the monster core for very long, he could clearly tell that the energy within the Class 1 monster core was substantially less than before. The monster core had even shrunk in size. Jian Chen inhaled sharply in astonishment at this new change. Although a Class 1 monster core did not have a large amount of energy, before he had become a saint, completely absorbing all of the energy within a Class 1 monster core would require him at least 3 nights. In the short amount of time that he had spent absorbing the energy from the Class 1 monster core, the amount of energy inside had already decreased significantly. Jian Chen couldn't possibly dare to imagine just how much energy he had absorbed into his body in that short amount of time. Afterwards, Jian Chen immediately inspected his inner body once more. However, to his surprise, he couldn't detect any of the energy he had just absorbed at all. His dantian didn't show any change, and the energy inside had no indication of growth either. It was almost as if the entire show just now was merely an illusion that hadn't occurred at all. If it weren't for the fact that Jian Chen could clearly feel that the energy in the monster core was now less than before, then Jian Chen would have thought the situation had all been in his head. This situation was far too weird to understand. His eyes creased together in deep thought, but no matter how much he thought about it, Jian Chen was completely confused. In the end, Jian Chen could only put aside the problem and begin to cultivate the absorbed energy. However, after experiencing that rapid rate of absorption, Jian Chen was very careful now and paid attention to his entire body in order to avoid the same situation as last time. But then who would have thought the moment he started to cultivate, the same event as last time would happen once more? The monster core in his hand emitted a faint glow as the energy inside coursed out of it at an inconceivable speed, before dissipating inside the meridians in his arms. Jian Chen went as rigid as a stone statue on his bed, without the smallest of movements taking place. Right now, he had finally confirmed that this was happening for real, and it was not just some sort of illusion. Just as Jian Chen was going to stop absorbing the monster core's energy, he immediately changed his mind. His entire mind was elevated to the highest level of concentration he could muster as he tried to familiarize himself with this situation. He wanted to clearly understand what was happening within his body, and what the reason was for the sudden terrifying increase in absorption. Moreover, Jian Chen wanted to know why the energy had simply disappeared into his dantian like a stone in the ocean, leaving behind no traces. The monster core within Jian Chen's hands had noticeably shrunken, and the energy inside had been steadily flowing into the meridians of his arms via his pores. With such a great flow of energy rushing into his arm, Jian Chen's skin was starting to feel a little sore from the barrage. When he was absorbing the world essence 2 days ago, its state had been much gentler, so the fast rate of absorption hadn't bothered him too much. But the monster core was different. The monster core had the energy of a magical beast condensed within it. No matter how strong the energy or how pure the soul was, it was far superior to the abilities of the world essence. The monster core also contained a berserk element inside, so when Jian Chen was absorbing the energy from within, he had felt a backlash. Jian Chen paid no attention to the pain at all, and instead completely focused his attention on the situation happening inside himself. The majority of the energy from within the monster core headed towards his dantian and trickled away. Only a small portion of it was assimilated into his body. However, when Jian Chen discovered where the energy was going, his face grew bright, as the energy was flowing towards the azure and violet glows within his dantian. The energy had unexpectedly been completely absorbed by the 2 glowing balls. Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes as he stared heavily at the monster core in his hands. Throwing it away, he shut his eyes closed once more, and began to cultivate the world essence as he usually did. The world essence began to flow towards him in a steady stream, faster and faster. Although the speed was at least a dozen times faster than his regular speed, about 99% of the world essence was being absorbed by the 2 glows of light within his dantian, while he was only absorbing 1% of the remaining amount into his body. After realizing this, Jian Chen decided to rely on cultivating using the world essence.
However, the speed at which he was cultivating and refining the world essence was 10 times slower than his normal speed.
With this conclusion, Jian Chen's expression grew ugly. His own personal cultivation rate was cut down to 1/10 of his original rate, something he did not want at all. He hadn't imagined that the 2 glows in his dantian would be such an annoyance. Afterwards, Jian Chen tried to absorb the monster core's energy once more.
His solemn face gradually loosened up as he began to think.
If he were to cultivate using the energy from the monster core, then his cultivation rate wouldn't be as slow as before he became a saint. Instead, it would be 3 times as fast. The most major flaw was that the amount it took to absorb the energy in this way required a lot of effort. Jian Chen had even started to sweat from the exertion.
Stopping his cultivation after a while, he looked outside the window to see the pitch-dark skies and helplessly sighed. If the glows in his dantian were to forcibly take his energy each and every time he cultivated, then the variables in his future would only get more difficult.
After all, just relying on absorbing the world essence gave him 1/10 of his cultivation speed. Absorbing the energy from the monster core tripled his speed, while also consuming more of his personal energy and focus, something Jian Chen couldn't endure. A single Class 1 monster core originally took Jian Chen 3 nights to absorb. Right now, absorbing that same Class 1 monster core required the same amount of time it took to make and drink a cup of tea. This meant that in a single night, Jian Chen could absorb 50 Class 1 monster cores. Even if Jian Chen was made of money, it would be difficult to say if Jian Chen could keep up with this new rate of consumption and absorption. According to his knowledge, he knew that this little bump on the road wasn't too hard to overcome. A step is a step. If I don't have any more monster cores, then I'll go out and hunt for more. It's not like the energy will always be taken away from me like this in the future. With this thought in mind, Jian Chen took out a batch of monster cores from within his space belt and continued to cultivate once more. The night passed quickly. The second morning arrived, concluding Jian Chen's daily cultivation period. Taking inventory of the amount of monster cores he used, he sucked in a sharp breath in shock. In the span of a single night, he had unexpectedly consumed the energy from 56 Class 1 monster cores. Jian Chen smiled bitterly. Even though his space belt contained a wealthy amount of monster cores, with this rate of consumption, the monster cores wouldn't last for more than a few days. When there were no more to absorb, Jian Chen would then be forced to rely on the world essence. Right now, Jian Chen could only hope that his dantian and the 2 glows of light inside would become saturated with energy, and stop taking it from him when he cultivated. It looks like I'll have to make a trip to the magical beast forest for some monster cores later. Jian Chen muttered under his breath. With a pacified heart, Jian Chen departed from his room and walked towards the grove outside of the academy to help teach his older brother with some techniques regarding fighting, as well as helping him gain some battle experience. As the sun rose, Jian Chen worked hard to teach Chongyang. Eventually, as the sun was at its highest point, Jian Chen concluded his explanations. Big brother, we'll stop here for now. As far as using and transforming your energy, you'll have to spend some time on getting it down. But when it comes to battle experience, you'll just have to fight with others to slowly improve, so there's no point in practicing by yourself so meticulously, Jian Chen said to his older brother. For the past few days, Jian Chen had spent his mornings teaching Chongyang various aspects of techniques and fighting. Chongyang nodded his head. I understand, fourth brother. Right now, Chongyang did not think that learning from his fourth brother was an odd occurrence. He didn't know what Jian Chen's lifestyle was like back at the Chongyang mansion, but he could tell that his own brother was a talented genius. Receiving some special attention would have been normal, so it wasn't that far-fetched to think that Jian Chen had learned these things from the clan elders. In addition, Chongyang knew that Jian Chen loved to read books, frequently spending entire days inside the academy's library. So it was possible that some of the things he knew came from the library as well. Big brother, you should slowly practice by yourself. I'll be leaving first. With that, Jian Chen exited the grove, leaving his brother to continue training by himself. In the middle of one of the academy training grounds, 2 youths wearing the same academy uniform were fiercely fighting against each other. One of them held a giant blade burning a fiery red as it emitted a sizzling chi. The owner of such a strong weapon was the gifted cultivation genius of Kargath Academy, Cheng Ming Xiang. Cheng Ming Xiang's opponent was holding a giant sword that was blue in color. He looked to be older than Cheng Ming Xiang. However, his face was dripping with sweat as he concentrated on the fight.
They fought ferociously, but a perceptive person would have been able to tell that the blue sword wielder was being forced to blindly defend against the red sword wielder.
My lord, I concede.
I cannot defend myself any longer.
The blue sword holder cried out.
Hearing him, Cheng Mingxiang immediately paused and let the sword in his hand disappear.
Shala, it seems like the duration that you can defend yourself for is getting shorter and shorter.
Looks like you have to work harder in the future. The current you is weaker than in the past. The youth gave a bitter smile as he laughed. My lord, it is not that my strength is getting worse, but that your strength is growing faster than mine.
I am no longer a suitable opponent for you.
Cheng Mingxiang looked proud at himself when he heard these words. At that moment, another student wearing the academy uniform came running over towards Cheng Mingxiang with an envelope in his hand. Lord Cheng, a letter from the clan elders have come.
Chapter 59. Revenge. Cheng Mingxiang's face became serious as he heard the student yell.
Taking the letter from him, Cheng Mingxiang began to rip open the letter. As he read the contents of the letter, Cheng Mingxiang's face grew darker and darker as his eyes began to show a raging anger within them. Seeing Cheng Mingxiang's reaction, the youth who had just sparred with him asked cautiously, Lord Cheng, what is the matter? Has something bad happened over at the sect? Clenching his hand together to become a fist, the letter became a crumpled-up ball of paper as Cheng Mingxiang grew angrier and angrier. The look in his eye had already evolved to contain a look of extreme hatred.
Chongyang Xiang Tian. Cheng Mingxiang gnashed at his teeth as his fingers clenched tightly into his palms. Just by looking at him one could tell just how angry he was. Hearing Cheng Mingxiang mention Chongyang Xiang Tian's name, the youth grew even more confused.
Opening his mouth to ask once more, he said, Lord Cheng, what in the world has happened?
Cheng Mingxiang growled with a dark voice. His Majesty has just betrothed Princess Gulan to Chongyang Xiang Tian, and has already officiated it. The youth's face changed when he heard him. He knew that Cheng Mingxiang had fond feelings for the princess. Ever since Cheng Mingxiang had first seen her at the imperial palace, he had essentially placed her beauty on the same level as a goddess and developed a deep crush on her. Since then, he had been unable to get over those feelings. Within Cheng Mingxiang's own heart, he had already marked Princess Gulan as his own. After all, within the Jessin kingdom, he was the only suitable match for a princess like her. Whether it be familial background or his own cultivation talent, Cheng Mingxiang was not at all lacking in these two fields. With his Hua Yun sect, they had power that almost rivaled the power of the royal family of the Jessin kingdom. Within the sect itself, Cheng Mingxiang's status was majestic beyond any other person. In the past, Cheng Mingxiang had wanted his parents to ask for the princess's hand in marriage from the emperor multiple times. But his parents had continuously wanted him to focus on cultivation instead. They didn't want his cultivation to be interrupted by a girl in the end. His parents' refusal to help him propose to the princess had made him resentful, but he didn't say anything. For in his mind, Cheng Mingxiang had decided that Princess Gulan was already his and that no one else would be able to snatch her away from him. After all, within the Jessin kingdom, there was no one else worthy of Princess Gulan, causing him to feel safe. But he didn't expect at all to meet someone else in Kargath Academy that was no weaker than himself. Chongyang Xiang Tian's gift at cultivation had exceeded his own, and he had even taken over Cheng Mingxiang's title of Kargath Academy's #1 cultivation genius. Not only did he steal that, but Chongyang Xiang Tian had even stolen away his one love, causing Cheng Mingxiang to be unable to endure this any longer. The youth that fought against Cheng Mingxiang cautiously looked at him before whispering, My lord, what do you plan to do now? Cheng Mingxiang's eyes flashed with a murderous tint as he snarled, Princess Gulan is mine, within the Jessin kingdom, only I am suitable to be married to her. His voice was filled with an unquenchable hatred. Shala, bring some people over, we shall head towards Chongyang Xiang Tian. This time, we will definitely teach him a lesson on trying to steal someone else's woman. Yes, my lord. The youth immediately scurried off in order to gather about people. Due to Cheng Mingxiang's strength, he had quickly amassed a large group of people. There were at least 16 of them and all were from noble families and had reached sainthood. Not only that, but the majority of these people had their monster cores taken from them by Jian Chen, causing them to fail the assignment in the forest. So because of that, they all harbored a grudge towards him. And when Cheng Mingxiang had started to gather people, each one of them eagerly signed up to take part in this. Among the group, there were two other people Jian Chen was very familiar with. They were Luo Jian of the Luo clan and Ka Di Yun of the Ka Di clan. Cheng Mingxiang gave a steady glance at everyone, a great big smile on his face. Good, there's plenty of people here. Even if we were to turn Chongyang Xiang Tian into a cripple, the Chongyang clan wouldn't dare say anything. The people gathered here today have no small amount of influence. Even the emperor would get a headache if he were to try protecting Chongyang Xiang Tian. Cheng Mingxiang was confident that he could beat Chongyang Xiang Tian in a fair battle. But now that His Majesty had officially declared the wedding between Chongyang Xiang Tian and Princess Golan, his status was like black and white compared to before. Not only did he have the backing of the Chongyang clan, but now he had the royal family supporting him. With this combination, even Cheng Mingxiang, who had a considerable amount of power and influence, would need to think carefully before planning. If he wanted to teach a simple lesson, then there would not be as big a problem. But Cheng Mingxiang didn't think it would be that easy. So for that reason, he had called many influential people to join him. With a coalition of power like this, the emperor would have to think twice before investigating. The Chongyang clan itself didn't even have a voice at all against this group. Shala, immediately fetch someone to go look for Chongyang Xiang Tian's location. Remember, this should not be let out at all. If the vice-headmaster or the headmaster find out about it, all of our plans will be ruined. Cheng Mingxiang ordered his training partner. Yes, my lord. Afterwards, Shala either directly spent money or relied on connections within the academy to secretly hear of Chongyang Xiang Tian's immediate location. At the same time, he also dispatched quite a few of his trusted people to search the entire academy. It was extremely calm within Kargath Academy. Nothing had been riled up by Cheng Mingxiang and his group of people's movements. 2 hours later, the 20 students that Shala had dispatched all returned, one by one. Lord Cheng, we've searched the entire Kargath Academy, but there was no signs of Chongyang Xiang Tian. A person reported to him. Cheng Mingxiang frowned and said, "How is that possible? Could it be that Chongyang Xiang Tian is not currently within the academy? I've heard Chongyang Xiang Tian loved to read in the library. Have you searched that building yet?" Luo Jian asked from the side. Although Luo Jian had been stabbed by Jian Chen, the medicine had healed his body back to the point of it being as good as new. "We've also searched the library. Chongyang Xiang Tian isn't there." The leader of the search continued. At that moment, a slightly chubby youth said, "I heard that Chongyang Xiang Tian is the freshman ruler. The freshman ruler has the special privilege of being able to enter the library's first 5 levels. Could it be that Chongyang Xiang Tian is hiding within the 5th level? If that really is true, then we can only wait until he comes out before we act." Hearing their fellow student, everyone in the group nodded. What that person had said had some logic behind it. The leader in charge of the search shook his head and said, "That can't be. I already asked the janitor lady within the library. She said that Chongyang Xiang Tian didn't enter the library at all today. Could it be Chongyang Xiang Tian is truly not within the academy grounds?" Cheng Mingxiang frowned. At that moment, another student hesitated slightly before saying, "Lord Cheng, although we didn't find Chongyang Xiang Tian, we did discover that Chongyang, who is in the Eastern Grove. Chongyang, who is Chongyang Xiang Tian's older brother. I feel like he might know of Chongyang Xiang Tian's whereabouts." Luo Jian's eyes lit up, but his expression soon fell again. He had just remembered everything that had happened that night. The monster cores in his possession had all been stolen from the Chongyang brothers and Tai Ta. Although he didn't dare to get revenge on Tai Ta, he wasn't afraid of the consequences of confronting Chongyang Xiang Tian's brother Chongyang, who, not bad. Chongyang, who definitely knows where Chongyang Xiang Tian went. "I recommend that we go ask him," Luo Jian said in a lower voice, his eyes flashing dangerously. "All right, we'll go find Chongyang Hu first." Everyone else quickly agreed with Luo Jian's suggestion. For the sake of not attracting other students' attentions, a dozen of them split with the group and took different paths towards the Eastern Grove. When the dozen of them rushed to the grove, they saw that Chongyang Hu was still there, practicing his martial arts. At the sight of Chongyang Hu, Luo Jian's eyes immediately burned in hatred, as if he could spit out flames. Perhaps Chongyang Hu was too absorbed in his practice, but he didn't sense Cheng Mingxiang's people's arrival. Cheng Mingxiang's group of people walked up to Chongyang Hu, and in unison, they stood in a circle surrounding him. Realizing this, Chongyang Hu finally awoke from his concentration. By the time he had reacted, he had already been surrounded by dozens of students. Chongyang Hu's gaze surveyed his surroundings. After he saw the expressions on the other party's faces, his heart skipped a beat as he had a bad premonition. especially after he saw Luo Jian's hatred-filled glare towards him. Chongyang, whose expression could not help but grow heavy. "What do you guys want?" Chongyang, who said.
Despite the dozen or so people surrounding him, his face still did not show a single trace of fear.
Luo Jian sneered. "Chongyang, who? Do you not remember what happened in the forest a few days ago?"
His face grew dark as he spoke and glared at him.
"Your group dared to steal my 3 days' worth of hard work and caused me to fail. For this slight, I will definitely pay you back an eye for an eye."
Chongyang, who snorted, and his gaze at Luo Jian showed no trace of fear as he coldly said, "Luo Jian, that was trouble that you had brought onto yourself. There's no way we are to blame for what happened.
If you hadn't first tried to steal our monster cores, then the following events wouldn't have occurred. Everything was your own fault. If you want to blame something, you can only blame your lack of strength. You even got defeated by my fourth brother, who hadn't even reached sainthood yet." Chongyang, who mocked, as he looked at Luo Jian in disdain. "You." Luo Jian was momentarily so indignant at Chongyang, whose response that he couldn't respond.
The event that had occurred that night in the forest was a humiliation that he would never be able to wipe from his memory.
Despite his strength as a middle-rank saint level, he had lost to a freshman that hadn't yet become a saint. In addition, the monster cores that he had spent 3 days of painstaking efforts to collect had all been taken away. This result was definitely something that the young master of the Luo clan couldn't accept. If word of his humiliation reached the clan, then Luo Jian would not be able to hold his head up high in the future. Chapter 60. Chongyang, whose injuries Luo Jian flew into a rage and immediately concentrated his energy into his right hand before charging towards Chongyang, whose reaction wasn't slow at all, since he had already been ready to retaliate since they surrounded him. So when Luo Jian had summoned his saint weapon, he had summoned his own yellow-colored battleaxe without any fear of the rapidly incoming Luo Jian. When the two saints started to move, the surrounding circle of people instinctively took a step back in order to avoid injury. Pang! Luo Jian's sword and Chongyang, whose battleaxe clashed against each other, emitting a tremendously loud sound. After the two weapons smashed into each other, the force of their actions caused the two to tremble in reaction. Their feet slowly retreating backwards, with Chongyang going back 4 or 5 steps while Luo Jian slowly retreated 2 or 3 steps. The two started to fight at a very close distance, but the spectators could tell that Chongyang was slowly losing ground. Although Luo Jian's wind attribute Saint Force focused on speed, and his attack was slightly weaker, his strength was still at the middle-rank saint level. Even if Chongyang, whose earth attribute Saint Force, had stronger defense, he wasn't Luo Jian's equal. After all, Chongyang had just reached saint level not too long ago. Luo Jian didn't plan on letting Chongyang off so easily. His body flashed with a cyan glow, and a wind began to revolve around his body endlessly. Luo Jian's body instantly appeared in front of Chongyang, the great sword raised high in the air, glowing cyan. He slashed it down towards Chongyang at frightening speeds. Since Luo Jian's Saint Force used the wind attribute, his speed was levels higher than other people's. Chongyang expression suddenly changed. Luo Jian's attack speed was so fast that he had no time to counter. In the end, he barely managed to raise the axe in his hand to block the attack with difficulty. "Chongyang, accept your death." At that moment when Chongyang axe hit Luo Jian's sword, another voice came crying out from the sidelines. It was Ka Di Yun with his own sword coming straight at him and immediately slashed down onto Chongyang right arm. An intense pain caused Chongyang to let out a groan. It was obvious that this attack had used quite a bit of Ka Di Yun's strength. It left a wound so deep on Chongyang's shoulder that one could see the bone. With his arm having suffered from such a huge attack, Chongyang could no longer maintain the saint weapon in his hand, and the great axe disappeared from his hand. Luo Jian's eyes flashed with a cold look and swung his sword at the stomach of Chongyang. The point of the sword ripped apart his uniform, and left a deep wound on Chongyang's stomach. Immediately, a river of blood came flowing out of the wound, causing his uniform to be dyed a bloody red. A look of extreme pain flashed through his face, but he didn't dare let out a sound. "Chongyang, I didn't think you'd get what you deserved so quickly." Luo Jian roared with laughter. The hatred he bore towards Chongyang couldn't be resolved easily. With another wave of his sword, he slashed down and left yet another wound on Chongyang's body. Chongyang's eyes were filled with a fierce glare towards Luo Jian as he snarled. "Luo Jian, how useless you are! Just because you couldn't beat my fourth brother, you have to fight me. Just wait and see if my fourth brother won't beat the crap out of you. Hearing Chang Yong-hu, Luo Jian's face grew dark. Striding forward, he immediately kicked Chang Yong-hu. Chang Yong-hu's eyes flashed at the opportunity. Just as Luo Jian's leg was about to make contact, his left arm flew out and clasped onto it. With a mighty strength, Chang Yong-hu pulled at it. Luo Jian's sense of balance was immediately disrupted, causing him to fall to the ground. Ha! Chang Yong-hu roared. His left hand formed a fist as his Saint Force entered his hand. Bringing it down, his fist speeding towards the floored Luo Jian. Luo Jian wasn't slow to react, however. As soon as he hit the floor, he rolled sideways away from Chang Yong-hu, causing the Saint Force-enhanced fist to miss. Pang! Chang Yong-hu's fist smashed against the floor and left behind a giant crater as it sunk into the ground. Chang Yong-hu, you really are looking to die. Luo Jian's handsome face went deathly white. With a snarl, the green-colored wind attribute Saint Force condensed into his fist, and almost as if it were lightning, he slammed his fist into Chang Yong-hu's stomach. PFF. Chang Yong-hu spat out a glob of blood as his body was sent flying backwards. After 4 or 5 meters, his body finally descended to the ground with a loud crash. Just as Luo Jian decided to rush forward to beat Chang Yong-hu even more, Cheng Ming-xian blocked his path. Luo Jian, you've taught him a lesson already. Our main goal is Chang Yong-xiang Tian, not Chang Yong-hu. At the very least, let us beat Chang Yong-xiang Tian's whereabouts out from him first. Luo Jian slowly nodded his head in silence. If it were someone other than Cheng Ming-xiang, then he would have looked down on the suggestion in contempt. But Cheng Ming-xiang was someone he couldn't afford to offend. Cheng Ming-xiang approached Chang Yong-hu with a cold laugh. Chang Yong-hu, where is Chang Yong-xiang Tian? Chang Yong-hu crawled up from the ground with some difficulty. His face was pale from blood loss, and his mouth still had a few drops of blood trailing down his face. But since his Saint Force had the Earth attribute, his defenses were fairly strong. If it were anyone else, that person wouldn't even have the strength to twitch a finger. Chang Yong-hu stared at the people surrounding him and growled. I don't know, but even if I did know, I wouldn't tell any of you. Although he had confidence in Jian Chen's strength, every single person here was at the saint level, and he didn't want his younger brother to fight alone against this group. Cheng Ming-xiang's face grew dark as he said coldly, Chang Yong-hu, I'll give you one more chance. Where is Chang Yong-xiang Tian? Chang Yong-hu looked up at him and gave a bloody smile. I already said I don't know. Humph. Cheng Ming-xiang sneered. Smashing his fist against Chang Yong-hu's face, he immediately slammed him to the ground once more. Will you speak or not? Chang Yong-hu's anger grew tremendously as he crawled up from the floor with the last of his strength. This one won't tell you. Cheng Ming-xiang, you better kill me straight away, or else I, Chang Yong-hu, swear that I will make you regret this. Cheng Ming-xiang looked at him with disdain. Chang Yong-hu, what right do you have to say that? Could it be because you are the young lord to the Changyang clan? Humph, it is merely the Changyang clan. My Hua Yun sect cares not about your clan. Cheng Ming-xiang's eyes flashed once more and he cocked his right hand backwards. With a bright red glint, the fist burrowed itself into Chang Yong-hu's head. Will you speak? Chang Yong-hu's body was badly bruised by the punch. Already his head was starting to drip with blood, but his resolute expression was still there, looking as fierce as always. You and I will go down together. Chang Yong-hu couldn't take it anymore. With the yellow light gathering in his left hand, he immediately slashed at Cheng Ming-xiang with his reformed saint weapon. A blazing red sword materialized in Cheng Ming-xiang's hand and he easily blocked Chang Yong-hu's attack. Not only did Chang Yong-hu suffer from serious injuries, he also was not accustomed to using his left hand to control his axe. Even if he had been completely fine, he definitely wouldn't have been Cheng Ming-xiang's equal anyways. Cheng Ming-xiang looked at Chang Yong-hu with a jeering sneer. Chang Yong-hu, I recommend you be obedient and tell us where Chang Yong-xiang Tian, that way you'll feel less pain. Chang Yong-hu gasped for air before going oddly calm. He understood that continuing on this route would only lead to disaster. He looked around the area and surveyed his chances before immediately dispersing his saint weapon and started to run towards the sports field. This grove was pretty remote. Normally, very few people passed through it. Thus, whatever happened here would naturally remain unknown to everyone else outside. Chang Yong-hu believed that once he ran to a more populated area, Cheng Ming-xiang's group of people definitely wouldn't dare to act. In addition, he had quite a few good friends within the academy. Although Chongyang who didn't hope for them to help him resist Cheng Mingxiang, he knew that they would at least run to notify a teacher, or even the vice headmaster. Seeing Chongyang who run off towards the sports field, Cheng Mingxiang's face changed. "Stop him," he called out. The dozen people who initially didn't move immediately set into motion, quickly chasing after Chongyang who. Even Cheng Mingxiang was starting to run at full speeds towards the direction of Chongyang who. Chongyang who was already seriously wounded, so he was unable to outrun these people. It hadn't even been a few moments before his pursuers had already begun to catch up with him. Seeing his enemies quickly catching up to him, Chongyang who felt fear creep into his heart as he realized that he would not be able to even make it out of the grove. With this thought, he snarled and immediately stopped in his tracks before retreating back into a different part of the grove. Chongyang who suddenly changed directions, making his pursuers feel suspicious. However, soon after, they smiled coldly, and even slowed down their pursuit. The group of people behind stood in a semicircular arc as they took their time to chase after Chongyang who. Luo Jian stood next to Cheng Mingxiang and sneered. Based on the direction Chongyang who is running towards, he's most likely looking for Chongyang Xiang Tian. Cheng Mingxiang nodded. That is true. So it seems Chongyang Xiang Tian is indeed not in the academy. Chongyang who used all his strength to run, but his current state was not looking good. His head was drenched with blood while his uniform was caked with blood and dirt, looking quite miserable all over. He truly had no idea where Jianchen was, but he knew that within the grove was a small hillside with a complicated layout and a lush plant life that was suitable for hiding. With the idea of fleeing into the school becoming obsolete, Chongyang whose only plausible way to escape was to hide away in the hillside and hope to shake off his enemies. However, Chongyang who had forgotten that the place where Jian Chen had taught him this morning was currently in the opposite direction. At a waterfall on the hillsides, a uniformed youth was cultivating in a puddle not too far away from the grass. The figure looked quite slender and weak with long black hair that went down to his waist. He looked rather handsome and had a bright glow in his eyes that was similar to the twinkle that reflected off of his sword. The youth had a small, silver sword about 1.3 meters long and 2 fingers wide. On the sword hilt were 2 words written in fancy calligraphy, "Light Wind." The youth calmly stood there. The sword in his hand pointed to the ground, and his whole person was as motionless as a mountain. At that moment, the youth's eyes let out a spark of light. His body fluidly began to move without warning. Only mirages from his quick movements could be seen. The silver sword in his hand had entirely become a white blur, and countless shadows of the sword blended together like an illusion that constantly flashed with light. As it moved in the air, only its afterimages could be seen. The youth cried out the words, profound steps as he moved through the ground quickly as if he was gliding with a great amount of agility and nimbleness. Seeing a rabbit, he quickly stabbed at it with his sword with such an inconceivable speed, anyone that saw him would be astounded. This youth was Jian Chen. After leaving the grove, he had directly arrived at this beautiful landscape, remembering the feeling of the use of the sword that he had experienced before in his previous world. Chapter 61. Increasing murderous intent. Jian Chen quickly moved through the grass. The light wind sword had already become a streak of white light. He slashed out with his sword at a rapid speed in several directions. His swordplay fast yet sharp. Following Jian Chen's quick movements, the wind scattered dry leaves into the air, fluttering around Jian Chen like gentle dancing butterflies. And at this moment, Jian Chen's swordplay suddenly changed. Although his sword techniques were still fast, but with every stab he made with his sword, the air whistled and left an afterimage that no ordinary person would be able to see easily. A moment after, the rapidly dancing sword in Jian Chen's hand suddenly stopped. But despite after such a long period of intense exercise, he did not even look out of breath and was instead still breathing normally. And at the same time, Jian Chen finally stopped his wild dance. The leaves that were all previously flying around him disintegrated into powder and scattered onto the ground. Only a few leaves were left completely intact, but written on some of them was the word sword. Although the size was different on each of them, it was written clearly and covered the entire area on each leaf. Although there were some other leaves with the word sword on it that had missing strokes, being either unclear or incomplete. If anyone else saw this sight, then they would surely be amazed to the point of having to pick up their jaw from the ground. This scene was far too astonishing to believe since the leaves had been floating wildly through the air, and even weaved with other leaves at random intervals. Just focusing on one leaf amid the mess of them,
Constantly changing positions in the air would definitely cause a person to become dizzy. It would have been even more impossible to think that someone had been able to clearly write the word sword on any of them. Most importantly, the leaves were very fragile and liable to break upon the gentlest of touch. To use a sword to achieve such a feat without leaving a single trace of a tear was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. If people were to find out about what Jian Chen had done, then his name and prestige would be announced and known to the entire Tianyuan continent in the shortest period of time. Watching the still intact leaves gently float down to the ground with a happy smile, Jian Chen muttered to himself, "Although my speed with a sword has deteriorated, my control over it has greatly improved to a level that can't even compare to my past. It's almost as if the sword has become an integral part of my body. Perhaps this is the advantage of this world's saint weapon."
Jian Chen's ears suddenly detected a sound.
Concentrating on the source, Jian Chen turned towards the opening of the grove while willing his silver sword to fade away. In a short amount of time, the place where Jian Chen looked at started to shake even more before a bloodied figure with a ripped uniform came scurrying out of it. Just one look at the clothes of the person and Jian Chen automatically knew that this was a student of Kargath Academy. But for what reason why the student was bloody all over, Jian Chen was puzzled. There were no magical beasts around, so there was no reason why he would be so injured. Kargath Academy also had strict rules about fighting among students. While giving each other's pointers was allowed, fights that could lead to fatal injuries were not allowed. However, when Jian Chen looked at the student's face, he immediately became stunned. His face froze in a hard expression as he looked at the amount of blood that covered half of the student's face.
Jian Chen couldn't believe what he saw, so he opened his mouth to cry out. "Big brother!" came the astonished shout. In a flash, he crossed over 30 meters to arrive at his blood-soaked and injured brother with worry etched on his face. Seeing the horrible wound on Chongyang, who as well as the blood still flowing from his head, Jian Chen's eyes narrowed in anger. "Big brother, what happened to you? Who did this to you?"
An intense murderous intent was emitted from his body the longer he looked at his injured brother. When it came to his brother Chongyang, he was the only person Jian Chen had actually cared about after his mother, because Chongyang had treated him like a true younger brother, so Jian Chen had wanted to repay him for this debt. When he had first come to Kargath Academy, it was Chongyang who had brought him on a tour around the academy grounds and explained the rules to him. He faced huge amounts of danger after running into the magical beast forest to fight and kill a Class 1 magical beast to gift Jian Chen its monster core without any regard for his own personal health. Although Class 1 magical beasts weren't even a threat to Jian Chen, Chongyang did not have as much fighting experience or combat skills as Jian Chen. At the time, Chongyang only had the strength of a peak 10th Saint Force Layer cultivator, so obtaining a Class 1 monster core wouldn't have been an easy task for him. Later on, his brother had even fought against Ka Di Yun for him on the platform even after knowing his own strength was lacking in comparison to his opponent, initiating the challenge. Jian Chen had clearly felt that Chongyang cared for him from the bottom of his heart, and so from then on, Jian Chen had always treated him like close family. In his previous life, Jian Chen was a war orphan who had his parents murdered by the enemy army. From his birth, he had no family or friends and never knew the warm embrace of family. But now that God had arranged such a nice life for him, Jian Chen would definitely treasure this, and Chongyang held the second biggest spot in his heart after his mother by Yun Tian. So seeing Chongyang beaten into such a state, Jian Chen's heart flew into a rage that was unprecedented. A single look from him gave the feeling that it could injure someone. Seeing Jian Chen suddenly appear, Chongyang looked at him with a dazed expression. However, his face changed once more as he spoke anxiously. "Fourth brother, why are you here? Hurry up and run. Leave this place, they'll be here in a moment." Chongyang looked impatient. He hadn't thought that he would run into Jian Chen here. Instead of running, Jian Chen's face darkened as he said in a low voice, "Big brother, who in the world beat you to such a state?" The suppressed rage in his tone could have been identified by anyone. Chongyang hands desperately grabbed onto Jian Chen's body as he continued to speak urgently. "Fourth brother, don't bother asking about that right now and leave this place immediately. Take the long route back to the academy, or else they'll definitely find you." Although he knew Jian Chen's strength was enormous since he had beaten a middle saint, Chongyang did not believe that even Jian Chen could take on a dozen saints, along with Chengming Xiang, who was an upper saint. But Jian Chen stood right where he was, like a stone statue that could not be budged. No matter what Chongyang did, nothing would sway Jian Chen. With eyes that spoke volumes of his murderous intent, he glared at the grove, waiting for someone to come out.
A dozen uniformed students eventually walked into his range of sight, with Luo Jian and Chengming Xiang walking in front of the group. When they saw Jian Chen, Chengming Xiang's and Luo Jian's expressions became excited. With a big smile, Luo Jian said, "Chongyang Xiang Tian, we found you at last. I was beginning to wonder where you had run off to." Without any need for instructions, the group of people immediately surrounded Jian Chen and his brother in a circle. Seeing how he and his brother were surrounded, Chongyang, whose face grew ugly, and gave a small sigh. But other than that, he said nothing. Despite the arrogant manner of the people around him, Jian Chen did not look scared at all, and instead remained calm. It was almost as if he had not even noticed such weak people were surrounding him at all. Jian Chen's face hardened as his eyes swept across the faces of the people around him. Some of them had pained looks on their faces. They felt a chill well up in their hearts, as if Jian Chen's stare was a cold blade that had penetrated their souls. "Who was the one who beat my brother?" Jian Chen shouted, "Step forward." Immediately, a large amount of force was released into the air. Despite the dozen members in front of him, Jian Chen was not scared, and instead held his head up high as a sign of his determination to not give up. Jian Chen's powerful command was accompanied by the release of a strong qi, causing all of them to take an instinctive step backwards. After all, Jian Chen had already been baptized with murderous intent, and the children in front of him who still had the smell of their mother's milk on them would not be able to stand up against it. Realizing that he had been intimidated by Jian Chen's command, Chengming Xiang became angry. He had thought that with his majestic upper saint strength, it would be him that would be doing the intimidation. He couldn't accept the reverse outcome. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, you're seeking death right now." Chengming Xiang snarled. The fiery red sword appeared in his hands, and gave off a searing red glow as it struck out towards Jian Chen's chest. Humph! Seeing the stab of the sword, Jian Chen's eyes flashed with strong murderous intent. His light wind sword immediately appeared in his right hand, parrying the stab from the other sword as fast as lightning. Ding! A crisp sound rang out as the two swords clashed. Both points of the swords had somehow pressed against each other. Seeing how the 2 points of the sword made contact with each other, Chengming Xiang's eyes widened in shock. He couldn't believe such an event had happened. Even if Jian Chen was his opponent, having the 2 points of the sword meet as both swordsmen stabbed out wasn't something any normal person could replicate, especially considering the difference in size between their 2 swords, and the speed at which they had thrust their swords forward. And to be able to do it so flawlessly, this was not the sign of a weak person. It signified that a person's saint weapon control had far surpassed that of a typical saint. However, Jian Chen, who had only recently broken through sainthood, had easily achieved such a feat. This made Chengming Xiang skeptical. He had thought that this was a coincidence, but the moment he saw Jian Chen's calm face, his heart immediately dispelled any notions of it being one. Another thing that had startled Chengming Xiang was the sword in Jian Chen's hands. Because the sword had been so tiny in comparison to his, he had thought it was merely an embroidery needle. It was 4 feet long and 2 fingers wide, so it looked quite frail in his eyes. It looked as if the moment a large amount of strength was exerted onto it, the weapon would snap in half. Chengming Xiang could swear that in his entire history of living, this was the first time he had ever seen such a sword. Within the Tian Yuan continent, every single saint had a saint weapon that leaned towards a great broadsword, since they had all condensed their saint force into heavy-type weapons. This convention was a fact that was commonly accepted by almost every single cultivationist. If Jian Chen's delicately small sword wasn't able to block against his attack, then Chengming Xiang definitely would have ridiculed Jian Chen. Chapter 62. Jian Chen's strength. Chengming Xiang's face hardened. This time, although opponent was only a newly broken through saint, he was facing his opponent seriously for the first time. "Chengming Xiang, since you've beaten my big brother, then don't expect to leave from this place unharmed," Jian Chen stated coldly. Chengming Xiang snorted in response and said, "Chongyang Xiang Tian, I admit I've underestimated you, but if you want to beat me with your new saint powers, that won't be possible." Jian Chen snorted as he looked on at Chengming Xiang with disdain. "Whether or not I have the ability to, come and see." Jian Chen immediately rushed forward. His wrist perfectly controlled the light wind sword and escaped the deadlock with Chengming Xiang's own sword by slapping the side of Chengming Xiang's sword fiercely. Clang! As the sounds of metal rang in the air, Chengming Xiang's sword was forced off to the sides by the light wind sword. Jian Chen had struck out with his sword with such force that Chengming Xiang's sword arm had become numb with pain. At the same time, Jian Chen was in the air, stabbing the light wind sword like a streak of silver light towards Cheng Mingxiang's chest. Cheng Mingxiang turned pale with fright. Jian Chen's speed was nearly too quick for him to keep up with.
He could only watch as the silver blade approached him with an inconceivable speed, unable to react or even move out of the way.
The light wind sword tore through Cheng Mingxiang's uniform and immediately sunk into his chest. But with Jian Chen's superior control, the sword did not sink in too deep. Immediately after feeling the sharp pain in his chest, Cheng Mingxiang immediately retreated, causing Jian Chen's sword to be pulled out. Cheng Mingxiang looked down to where the blood was dripping down onto his uniform with a terrified look.
He replayed the moment over and over in his head. He had been unable to dodge the sword at all.
In his entire life, he could swear that this was the fastest swordplay he had ever seen. He had even started to feel terrified at Jian Chen's strength, but he just couldn't understand how a newly advanced saint could be this strong. Jian Chen didn't plan on letting him off too lightly though. Immediately using profound steps, he took off like a demon-possessed, and with another flash of his silver light, Jian Chen struck out at Cheng Mingxiang's chest with great speed. Ah! Cheng Mingxiang let out a miserable shout as he saw blood spray out once more. The blood from the left side of his chest had started to spread over to his right side. The wound was so deep that the bone underneath could be seen as the blood inside his body violently bubbled out, staining the entire top half of his uniform with it. The fury in Jian Chen's eyes didn't dissipate at all as he brandished his light wind sword and inflicted wound after wound upon Cheng Mingxiang's body. The wounds on Cheng Mingxiang steadily increased, each one looking even more frightening than the one before while going deep into the body.
Not only was his body being sliced at, but his entire academy uniform had already started to fall apart, and the remaining cloth becoming redder by the second.
Seeing how their strongest member Cheng Mingxiang was powerless under Jian Chen, the dozen other students became as quiet as wooden chickens. Seeing how Cheng Mingxiang was endlessly screaming, this had completely overturned what they had thought about him as they looked on with a stunned expression. Luo Jian reacted first. Even though he was equally amazed at the display of strength Jian Chen was showing, he had at least 10 other companions who were all at the saint level. With a great increase in courage, he roared, "Everybody charge, even if he's strong, he's still just one person. How could we be afraid of just a single person?" Luo Jian raised his green greatsword with a snarl as he charged towards Jian Chen. Hearing Luo Jian's speech, the students all jolted back to awareness. With a look at one another, the fear that was planted into their hearts by Jian Chen was immediately cast out. With a lift of their great swords, battle axe, large knives and spears, each student charged at Jian Chen with great arrogance. Jian Chen's eyes flashed as he watched the people come forward, but he didn't retreat. Taking the initiative and charging in with his light wind sword, he immediately stabbed toward the closest person's stomach.
PC.
Jian Chen's sword slid into the student's body with ease. Against him, these students had no battle experience, so there was no way they'd be able to fight back.
Hark! Go die!
At that moment, Jian Chen had entered the encirclement. Jian Chen sneered, and the light wind sword emitted a slight glow as traces of sharp and powerful sword qi began to spread out from the blade. Jian Chen's right hand seemed to turn into a mirage, as the light wind blade seemed to pierce all 4 directions as fast as lightning. Every time he thrust his sword out, he could accurately hit another weapon. After only a short amount of time, Jian Chen had already lashed his sword out 10 times. Ding, ding, ding. A symphony of metal against metal sounds rang out, the sounds all merging together as one. When the light wind sword in Jian Chen's hand collided with the saint weapons, the expressions of all the surrounding students that were all middle saints changed. They immediately retreated, the saint weapons in their hand shaking from the collision. Jian Chen's sword appeared to be extremely small, but it hid a great amount of power behind it. After a single collision with his sword, the saint weapons all vibrated so intensely from the aftershock that it made the students' arms numb. While blocking all of the attacks, Jian Chen's expression didn't change. His movements did not pause at all, and his feet left traces in the ground as he used monster-like movements to charge through the group of people. The light wind sword in his hand danced around in the air at high speeds, turning into a silver glow. The light made it look like there were millions of sword afterimages freezing in the air, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Ah! Ah! With Jian Chen's monster-like movements, sharp shouts of pain rang out in the air. The desolate cries could make any weaker-hearted people absolutely horrified, and a chilliness began to arise in the air. The blood-covered Chongyang, who stood on the side, staring in a daze at the Jian Chen constantly moving about like a demon, causing the students to cry out in shock. At the moment, his mind had already completely ground to a halt. He had already completely lost his cognitive abilities. At that moment, the dozens of students had already all fallen to the ground. Their ashen faces were filled with pain, and their originally perfectly clean and tidy uniforms were now torn all over the place. Each tear was dripping with blood, dyeing their entire uniforms crimson. Moreover, that white light continuously flashed over their bodies, quickly increasing the number of wounds on their bodies. From their upper torso down to their legs, their entire bodies were covered with frightening wounds. Their blood flowed like rivers out from their injuries, and they quickly began to look like they were made of blood. Jian Chen circled the students at high speeds. The light wind sword in Jian Chen's hand slashed at their bodies continuously, causing splashes of blood and torn pieces of clothing to fly out in the air. Chang Yang, whose injuries greatly affected Jian Chen's emotions. Although Jian Chen didn't kill these dozens of students, he would definitely not let them go lightly. If these people weren't attending the same school as Jian Chen was, and if Jian Chen wasn't worried about stirring trouble within their families, he would definitely end their lives without hesitation. Senior Chongyang Xiang Tian, please have mercy. Please have mercy on us. We won't dare to do this ever again. Senior Chongyang Xiang Tian, please let us go this time. We won't ever do it again. Finally, the people could no longer endure the torture, and had begun to beg for mercy. As soon as one person began to cry out, the others all started to plead for their lives as well. However, a few of the more temperamental people were still gritting their teeth and holding themselves back. They had also considered running, but both their legs and arms were currently sporting terrifying wounds. The slightest movement caused them to bite down in pain. There was no way they could run. At the least, they didn't have the willpower to endure such an intense pain. Jian Chen ceased his movements. His expression was cold and indifferent. He didn't have a hint of blush on his cheeks, and his breathing was calm. However, the light wind sword in his hand was dripping with fresh blood. Jian Chen's body was as tall and straight as a mountain, immovable in his spot. His eyes flashed coldly as if they seemed to be able to pierce through one's soul. He slowly swept his gaze across the dozen students lying on the ground and said, "I can let you guys go, but you have to answer this. Who injured my older brother?" "It's Lord Cheng, Luo Jian, and Ka Di Yun." Right, it was those three that had injured Chang Yang who was wounded by those three. We didn't do anything at all. The dozen youths struggled to say their excuses first, afraid that if they were too slow in their responses, Jian Chen would be discontent. At the moment, they had already long abandoned any thoughts of retaliation against Jian Chen, and wholeheartedly regretted their actions. Among them, half of the people had had their monster cores taken away by Jian Chen in the forest. The other half had no enmity towards Jian Chen, and had merely been gathered by Chengming Xiang. Jian Chen's eyes flashed fiercely. He coldly glared at Chengming Xiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Di Yun, a powerful murderous intent evident in his gaze. Under Jian Chen's murderous gaze, Chengming Xiang and the other two felt chills in their hearts, and all showed terrified expressions. Chapter 63. Incoming Disaster. Chongyang Xiang Tian. What are you going to doing? Let us go immediately. Let's forget about the events that happened today. Otherwise, just you wait for my Hua Yun sect to come for revenge. Chengming Xiang said sternly. Even an idiot could tell with one look that Jian Chen didn't plan on letting them go that easily. Right now, Chengming Xiang wanted nothing else but to leave this place and plot his revenge for another day. Jian Chen sneered, "Let you go? It won't be that easy." Hearing this, Chengming Xiang and the two others' face dropped. Ka Di Yun spoke with a gloomy voice. "Chongyang Xiang Tian, we may have injured your brother, but now you have injured us, let us wipe the slate clean." Jian Chen slowly walked towards the three with his light wind sword emitting sword qi. The three watched as the sword slowly enveloped itself in a bright glow of silver as if it was being eaten by it. A clean slate? How could it be that easy? Today you three will leave an arm behind, and if there is another time in the future, then it will be your life. Jian Chen had already arrived in front of Ka Di Yun, his light wind sword already swishing down in an arc like silver lightning towards Ka Di Yun's shoulder. Ah! Ka Di Yun let out a desolate scream as the intense feeling of pain racked his face. Already all color had drained away from it. A fountain of blood sprayed out of the stump from where his right arm originally was as it flopped down onto the ground lifeless. Jian Chen had chopped off Ka Di Yun's right arm. Cheng Ming-xiang and Luo Jian's face immediately changed as they watched with a tremble. Another look at the severed arm, and then at Ka Di Yun's screaming figure had caused them to become deathly white in the face. The 10 other students looked at Jian Chen with fear. This type of development was something they were not expecting to see. Who would have known that he was this merciless and severed someone's arm without hesitation? This cruel display had brought them no small amount of anxiety and fear. But there was a small shimmer of hope. They had fortunately not fought against Chang Yonghu. If it were not for that small fact, then they had no doubt that they would be joining Luo Jian, Chang Ming-xiang, and Ka Di Yun amongst the ranks of losing an arm. Jian Chen had treated the event as if it was an insignificant matter, his face not revealing any emotion whatsoever during the act. Whether it was the splattered blood on the ground or Ka Di Yun's screams of pain, it had no effect on him. Instead, he looked at Luo Jian and walked closer towards him with his bloody sword. As Jian Chen approached, fear filled Luo Jian's face. Ignoring the pain from his wounds, he began to crawl backwards away from Jian Chen at a snail-like pace while crying, "Chongyang Xiangtian, what are you doing? Don't come any closer." Jian Chen kept his slow pace as he walked towards Luo Jian. With an icy stare that revealed no mercy in his eyes, he slowly raised his light-winged sword. Seeing Jian Chen lift his silver sword, Luo Jian became even more terrified. He had long since lost his arrogant attitude and started to plead to him, "Chongyang Xiangtian, please. I beg of you. Please don't cut off my arm if you let me go. I, Luo Jian, swear that in the future I will definitely repay you." Jian Chen showed no signs of stopping. Swinging his sword in another arc of silver light, he swiftly cut off Luo Jian's arm under the owner's disbelieving eye. Ah! A terrified scream came out from Luo Jian as his right arm was separated from his shoulder, causing blood to come spraying out onto the ground. "Chongyang Xiangtian, I definitely won't let you go." Luo Jian grimaced as he used his anger to roar in anger. Already his eyes became bloodshot as he stared at Jian Chen with intense hatred. Jian Chen didn't take any notice of Luo Jian's cry, and instead walked off towards Cheng Ming-xiang. Cheng Ming-xiang's face was still a deathly white color. There was only regret in his heart as he realized his strength was weaker than Jian Chen's. If it weren't for the fact that he had a dozen other people at the saint level, he wouldn't have been forced into such a difficult situation. Seeing the still approaching figure of Luo Jian, Cheng Ming-xiang couldn't quell the feeling of absolute dread in his heart as he tried to calm down. "Chongyang Xiangtian, if you don't want to bring your clan into this." Hearing Cheng Ming-xiang's words immediately caused a reaction from Jian Chen. A glare appeared on his eyes as he immediately flashed forward to where Cheng Ming-xiang was. Before he could even finish his sentence, Jian Chen had already lopped off his right arm. Cheng Ming-xiang stifled a shout as his face flashed with pain. He was not like Ka Di Yun or Luo Jian, who had both screamed. The scream of pain had already been suppressed in his throat, but his face was still warped into a different expression. It would seem that his pain threshold was greater than the other two. Jian Chen's ice-cold gaze landed on the three people and he coldly said, "Today, I cut off your arm, but if there's a next time, I will take your life. Don't think I am bluffing, I will be true to my word." Jian Chen's eyes swept over to where the other students laid. As he looked at each student, they stared down at the ground in fear. Whenever Jian Chen had looked at them with his bloody sword, none of them had even the smallest idea of trying to get revenge. Jian Chen looked at his bloody light-winged sword, and with a single thought, he held the sword with the point facing downwards. All of the blood accumulated on the sword started to accumulate at the tip of the sword and slowly started to drip down onto the dusty earth, restoring the light-winged sword to its original bright glory. With the light-winged sword finally clean, Jian Chen returned to where Chang Yonghu was. After seeing his bloody brother, the icy stare on Jian Chen's face softened as he said with concern, "Big brother, let's go back now." Chang Yonghu nodded his head dumbfounded. Right now his eyes were wide open after watching the entire fight that had just happened. Even though he had personally witnessed Jian Chen's victory, he was still having a hard time in believing it. Jian Chen lent a hand towards the bloody Chang Yang, who and the both turned around to walk back to his dorm by a secluded road. But despite this, the both of them would still see enough people that would spread the news that Chang Yonghu was heavily injured around the academy. Not long after Jian Chen had returned back to his room, the students lent a hand towards the three injured students and began their slow walk towards the academy. The moment the academy came into sight, everyone went into an uproar, especially for the three students each missing an arm. Nobody could believe their eyes at what they had seen. The news of the injured students spread across the academy with rapid speed. The news had even spread to the teachers, who immediately reported it to the vice headmaster Bai En. When Bai En had heard that Chang Ming-xiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Di-yun had their arms cut off, he placed extra importance on the matters and immediately relayed them to the medical experts of the academy. As Bai En arrived at the medicinal wing of the academy, a large group of people had already gathered on the outside as they clamored around for news. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai En pushed aside the crowd of students and directly forced his way up to the medicinal wing to see the situation. There were currently a dozen blood-covered students lying on stretchers. In the middle of the room stood two middle-aged men and a woman currently closing their eyes. They had their hands spread out above three of the students, emitting a milky white light from their hands that enveloped these students. Shrouded in milky white rays of light, the three students' terrifying wounds were being quickly sealed before their very eyes. The speed of the healing was unfathomably fast, and within a short breath, the three students' wounds had already disappeared without a trace. Once the wounds disappeared, the expressions on the three students' faces clearly changed. Now they showed no traces of pain. On the contrary, they looked a lot more relaxed now. At the same time, one could see traces of alarm in the depths of their eyes. After treating the three students, the two men and one woman showed their humble appreciation to Bai En. Soon after, they continued to treat the remaining dozen or more students in the middle. The vice headmaster had an ugly expression on his face as his gaze swept across the dozen students. His gaze lingered for an especially long time on Cheng Ming-xiang and the other two that had lost their right arms. His expression fell as he bellowed. "What happened here? Who wounded you to this extent? Could it be that you encountered someone from outside? Humph. Don't they know that everything within this 100-kilometer perimeter is Kargath Academy's territory? To think that someone would dare to enter Kargath Academy and injure its students, this is really absurd." Bai En was fuming. It was very obvious that he thought that Cheng Ming-xiang and the other dozen students had been hurt by some people from the outside vice headmaster. "It was Chongyang Xiantian. We were all injured by Chongyang Xiantian," a student weakly cried. "That's right, vice headmaster. You have to demand justice for us. Chongyang Xiantian not only heavily injured us, but he even cut off the arms of Lord Cheng and the two others." Vice headmaster Bai En was completely shocked into a daze by these words. He only felt disbelief. Among these dozen students, the weakest person was at least a lower saint. There were even some middle saints, and one upper saint among them. With such a lineup, even if they encountered a great saint, they would still definitely be able to overwhelm him. He really couldn't believe that so many people had actually been beaten black and blue by a freshman that had only just broken through saint level a few days ago. Bai En couldn't accept this fact at all. After confirming what actually happened, Bai En's expression immediately grew serious. His heart had already sank to the utmost degree. He immediately looked for the headmaster. What happened here was far too complicated for Bai En to resolve. After Bai En recounted the entire situation to the headmaster lost his calm. He jumped up from his chair with an expression of utter shock and said, "What? Is what you said really true? Cheng Ming-xiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Di-yun all had their arms cut off by Chongyang Xiangtian?" "Yes, headmaster. I personally made a trip to see. The three individuals' arms were indeed cut off," said Bai En solemnly. "Hi," the headmaster sighed heavily and said, "This time the situation has worsened. This Chongyang Xiangtian is far too impulsive. Ka Di clan and Luo clan are of no problem. However, Hua Yun's sect is not someone the Chongyang clan can afford to offend. Headmaster, what should we do now? Our Jessen kingdom had much difficulty producing a genius like Chongyang Xiangtian. We can't just stand by and watch a genius with limitless potential die when he had not yet finished maturing. Otherwise, this would really be too major a loss for Jessen kingdom," Vice Headmaster Bai En said in a heavy tone. Chapter 64. Goodbye Chong. By the headmaster murmured quietly. "What you said is correct. Chongyang Xiangtian must be protected. Bai En, you stay here and resolve the matters in the medicinal building. I will go to the Chongyang clan immediately. Otherwise, if we were to wait for the experts of the Hua Yun sect to arrive, the situation will become too terrible." After, the headmaster walked towards the frame of the window and jumped out of it. Then just like a big bird, he immediately flew into the sky with frightening speed and flew off into the horizon. Seeing the headmaster disappear into the horizon, Bai En let loose a sigh. Chongyang Xiang Tian has really disturbed the peace this time. If he had only just beaten them, then the situation wouldn't be that bad. But he had to go and cut off Qingming Xiang's arm. Although it's not like the arm can't be reattached, but the strength needed for this is too high. Even the Hua Yun sect cannot invite a rank 7 Radiant Saint Master with ease. By this point, the entire academy had heard about the 3 students who had their arms chopped off by Chongyang Xiang Tian. It was the topic of discussion amongst every student, and with that, Chongyang Xiang Tian's strength had created another shock between the teachers and students. While the academy was talking about that, Jian Chen sat crossed-legged on his bed as he began to reflect upon his actions. He knew in his heart that by chopping off the arms of Chengming Xiang, Luo Jian, and Ka Di Yun, he had brought upon a great deal of trouble on himself. However, he didn't regret what he had done at all, so all he could do right now was ponder deeply on how he could deal with the wrath of the 3 groups. The day went by quickly and soon became night time. Dong dong dong. A loud knocking sound came from the other side of Jian Chen's room. Hearing the sound, the crossed-legged Jian Chen slowly opened his eyes. Looking down to see the various Class 1 monster cores without energy, he sighed silently before looking towards the door. Who is it? Chongyang Xiang Tian, this is Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en. Came Bai-en's familiar voice from outside the door. Jian Chen immediately got off his bed and walked over to open the door. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en was standing right outside his door, with an unsightly expression. Vice Headmaster, what's wrong? Jian Chen asked in a conversational tone. He already guessed what the Vice Headmaster had come for, but his heart was still extremely calm and unwavering. Vice Headmaster Chong Bai-en glanced at Jian Chen with a complicated look and sighed. Chongyang Xiang Tian, please pack up, then immediately follow me to the headmaster's office. Oh! Jian Chen indifferently replied. He did not say anything afterwards, and quietly went back to his room to pack up his things. Jian Chen didn't have many belongings. He grabbed some of his own medicines and stored them into his space belt. Then he followed Bai-en to the center of the academy where the single lone tower stood. Ah, look over there. Isn't that Chongyang Xiang Tian? It is. Looks like he's walking together with the vice headmaster. Maybe he received a super strict punishment. As they walked through the sports field, a crowd of students started to gather and chatter amongst themselves. Jian Chen turned a deaf ear to the discussions that had arisen around him. He followed behind Vice Headmaster Bai-en, and they soon arrived at the central tower, and directly entered the headmaster's office. Right next to the Vice Headmaster's table sat 2 elders. One of them was a relieved headmaster while the other elder was wearing a cyan-colored pow and had long black hair that was tied back. From behind the desk, the old man looked quite ordinary, just like any other old man. Headmaster, Chongyang Xiang Tian has been brought. Vice Headmaster greeted politely. Hearing this, the headmaster's gaze immediately settled onto Jian Chen, and he said in a calm voice, Bai-en, you may leave. Yes, sir. Bai-en quickly left. At that moment, the only people left inside the office were Jian Chen and Kargath Academy's headmaster, as well as an elder in a blue/green robe. Ever since Jian Chen first entered, his line of vision had been fixed on the blue/green-clad elder. This elder wasn't any stranger to Jian Chen. It was Chongyang clan's butler, Chong Bai. Chong Bai, why have you come? Jian Chen said while looking at the elder. Chong Bai gave a complicated look at Jian Chen before sighing. Fourth Master, from all of your days at Kargath Academy, we have been watching you and your achievements. Whether it be your mother or father, they both feel extremely proud. But this act of yours today was too impulsive. Jian Chen naturally understood what Chong Bai was saying, and said firmly, Chong Bai, I don't regret anything. They brought this on to themselves. My older brother hadn't offended them in any way, but they still heavily injured him. Even if I relived this experience, I would still do the same thing. Chong Bai sighed, Fourth Master, I don't disagree with your methods. After all, in the Tian Yuan continent, it is strength that rules over others. Although their strength was weaker than yours, you did not think about the powers they had backing them up. If it was just the Kadi clan or Luo clan, then our Chongyang clan would not have much trouble with dealing with them. But Chengming Xiang is the treasured son of the Hua Yun sect's leader. The Hua Yun sect holds the biggest amount of power in the Jesson kingdom after the royal family. So this is a power the Chongyang clan cannot afford to provoke. Chongyang Xiang Tian, the Hua Yun sect's strength is quite formidable. Although they aren't as powerful as the royal family, even the royal family is afraid of any consequences for meddling with them. Currently, among the top 6 experts in Jessen Kingdom, the Hua Yun sect alone takes up 2 of those spots. The headmaster said with a serious expression. Jian Chen's expression also gradually grew more serious at these words. At that moment, a light knock came from outside the door. A respectful voice rang out from outside. "Respected headmaster, Chongyang who has been brought." "Enter," the headmaster said. The door opened, and a teacher walked in leading Chongyang Hu. Chongyang Hu was currently wearing a new academy uniform, but scars still clearly covered his face. "Chongbai!" Chongyang Hu yelled the moment he walked in. He was unable to contain his emotions as he spoke with astonishment. The teacher didn't enter the headmaster's office. After sending Chongyang Hu in, and sending the headmaster his respects, he lightly closed the door and left. Chongbai's eyes lingered onto the scar on Chongyang Hu's face. His pair of ordinary-looking eyes finally revealed some fury in them. Without any other external movements, he spoke. "Eldest master, you've suffered greatly." Chongyang Hu shook his head without any mind, and said, "It's just a bit of injury, nothing major." "However, Chongbai, why did you come to the academy?" Chongyang Hu asked in confusion. Chongbai's face didn't react in the slightest, and instead said gently, "Eldest master, fourth master, you should go pick up the rest of your things." Jian Chen quietly nodded without saying a word. "I've already packed everything. Chongbai, did you come to take me away?" Chongyang Hu asked in a reluctant tone. Chongbai nodded. "Correct, I've come today to pick you 2 up and depart from the academy. It would be unwise for you 2 to continue living at Kargath Academy." Hearing this, Chongyang Hu's expression became dark. He had spent quite a long time at Kargath Academy, and had already developed special feelings of attachment towards it. "Chongyang Hu, Chongyang Xiangtian, you 2 should first head out. I still have a few things I want to discuss with Chongbai," the headmaster said. Jian Chen and Chongyang Hu didn't have any objections, and they immediately turned around to walk out of the headmaster's office. Jian Chen and Chongyang Hu weren't kept waiting for long. Chongbai came out from the headmaster's office soon after. However, when he looked at the 2, his face changed to one of happiness. Jian Chen and Chongyang Hu followed Chongbai down the tower, and got onto the flying-type magical beast to leave Kargath Academy. It directly flew up into the air, and began heading towards Lore City. Jian Chen and Chongyang Hu didn't speak on the magical beast's back. While the 2 were being rushed home, the both of them seemed to be extremely heavy-hearted. Within Jian Chen's head, he couldn't help but to think about the motherly affections he had received. Although Jian Chen wasn't a kid in his mind, he had never dealt with such an experience before, and so this motherly affection was a new thing. So Jian Chen had a very low resistance towards this. In Jian Chen's mind, he could not help but recall his previous life in the Chongyang household. His mother had been wholeheartedly caring towards him, and had loved him dearly every step of his life. This made Jian Chen's frozen heart, which had never experienced a mother's love before, become a sea of warmth, and he enjoyed and treasured this feeling. Time quietly passed as the Class 4 magical beast soared through the air at high speeds and caused the wind to constantly whistle in Jian Chen's ear. Jian Chen's black, waist-length hair was blown messily in the air as it danced in the wind. Especially now that he had a handsome and dashing appearance, he looked as confident as ever as he rode on top of the flying magical beast with ease. The flying magical beast crossed over many different villages and cities under the guise of the pitch-dark skies. After a few hours of flying 1,000 kilometers above the ground, they finally arrived at Lore City. Under the control of Chongbai, the eagle beast descended onto the grounds of the Chongyang mansion. The servants who managed the rear courts had long since left the area, leaving behind only the most loyal of guardsmen. A large gust of wind descended upon the courtyards as the eagle beast came down from the skies and landed onto the ground as the 3 males climbed down from it. A group of people had already gathered around the eagle beast with a middle-aged man wearing a black and white POW leading the group. This was the master of Chongyang Mansion and the father of Jian Chen, Chongyang Ba. By his side were 4 very beautiful women, Jian Chen's mother by Yun Tian and his 3 aunts. Standing by his 4th aunt's side was a girl who looked to be around 18 years old. This was his second sister he hadn't seen in a few months, Chongyang Mingyu. Standing right next to her was another person who looked to be around Jian Chen's age. It was Chongyang Ku, his 3rd brother. However, in Chongyang Ku's eyes was a look of mirth as if he was happy to see Jian Chen in such misery after leaving Kargath Academy. Standing behind the family were a few middle-aged men and elders. They were high-ranking members of the clan,
But each one of them had a grave expression on their faces as they looked at Jian Chen with a complicated stare. Some looked at him with happiness, others with an expectant expression, and some who just sighed. Changbai walked towards Chongyangba and gave a small smile. "Clan leader, I have not failed you. I have brought the eldest master and fourth master back home safely," he stated. Chongyangba looked at Changbai and clasped his hands together. "Changbai, thank you very much for your trouble. Clan leader is being too courteous. This is just part of my duty," Changbai said. Chongyangba swept his gaze across Jian Chen and Chongyanghu. His eyes held both expressions of gratification and admiration as he looked at Jian Chen, and his expression had also become excited, although it was still nevertheless worried. Finally, he let out a long sigh and said, "Xiang Er, Ahu, both of you come with me to the main hall." Chongyangba turned around and began to walk out. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.